everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mayor Boulan? Chief Burton?
Here.
Mr. Kutash?
Here.
Ms. LaRussa?
Here.
Mr. Montecalvo?
Here.
Councilmember Olszewski? Absent. Mr. Zill?
Here.
Vice Chair Tierney?
Here.
Chair Knox? Ms. Chang? Mr. Kramer?
Here.
Mr. Zamba stepped down, and we have Dr. Peterson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. So at this part of the meeting, I know many of you will have actual questions on the application, which we'll actually get to in a few. We haven't had a chance to hear it. I can hear you screaming at me from the back. Thank you so much. Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. This is the part of the meeting. Once we start the application, everybody will have the chance to ask all of the questions that they want. We have until 10 o'clock tonight to take everybody's input. You'll be able to ask questions of the applicant's professionals, and then you'll be able to give your own statement on the application. So I want to make sure we understand your quality curve, and we'll get to all of your questions and all of your comments. This is the part of the meeting where we answer any general questions you have about how we proceed, but hopefully that was enough of an explanation.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Also, I know we have at least one attorney who's here tonight. So any attorneys here representing clients, please stand and make sure you're on the mic and just enter your appearance and tell us who your clients are.
Do we have an attorney present?
We have one. I just spoke to him.
Okay. Oh, sir, did you?
If you just come to the mic and just enter your appearance and give us your clients.
Good evening. My name is Arthur Robert Carmano Jr., and I reside at 50 Seadrift in town. Thank you. I'm representing myself.
Counsel, do you have any objections to the board's jurisdiction tonight? Regarding notice or anything like that?
I spoke to a planner and he had some issues, but they were not resolved. It was a notice issue based upon the application that 2 of the 3 lots were on the application and the adjoining property lot was not, and whether or not there was any planning that lot is adjacent to the building would be used at all for garbage, for bringing in deliveries, either into or out of.
Do you know the lot number?
You're talking about the contiguous lot?
1101, I believe, is the lot number.
Yeah, we had testimony at the last meeting that is not part of the application.
I am aware of that, but my question is,
Well,
will the
today is
use
just for
spill over
right
from
now.
garbage cans?
Right now, it's just for the,
We stipulated that it won't be used for any purpose, and, the aesthetics of that lot weren't great. If somebody wanted us just to seed it, that would
well,
be fine.
for purposes right now, this is just for jurisdiction. So the applicant has stipulated that lot's not part of the application. You'll have an opportunity to cross-examine their professionals, and it turns out that it is. We can revisit it, but as of now, take the stipulation. I still feel the board has jurisdiction.
I'm not stipulating, but I will withdraw. I will
No.
not.
I would say counsel for the applicants.
Oh, okay.
Confirm that you're not making
I'm not making a jurisdictional objection at this time.
Okay. Just wanted to get that on the record, Madam.
Thank you so much. So we have a resolution to approve memorialization of subdivision LUB.
That's going to be carried.
That's carried to the next one, okay? And then we move to CLAS. So, just to recap, at the last month's meeting, we had 2 of the applicant's professionals.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Mr. Lamont, Carl has to step down before we get into it. They have to review.
Oh, okay, thank you. Next up is a forum.
Mhm.
And we had two of the applicant's professionals testifying, questions were asked. Ron, you want to give a recap of where we are?
Sure. It was open to the public for cross-examination of the applicant's two professionals. I do not believe we completed the questioning, so we're going to reopen that and do it tonight. Well, what I would say is if you asked questions at the last meeting, that was your opportunity. So for tonight, it's for people who have not asked questions to these two witnesses. There are going to be more witnesses that come that you'll have an opportunity to cross-examine. And of course, at the end of the hearing process, you'll be able to give testimony as to why you either support or don't support the project. Counsel, if you could just restate the two witnesses that had testified and that are still under cross-examination.
Sure, Mr. Cucciaro. John Anderson of Los Santos, known on behalf of the applicant Seagrass. I have some short, very brief remarks, kind of a summary, and I will give the witnesses' names. The witnesses were James Whalen, who was operational testimony. He's one of the principals in the entity. We also had Mr. Al Shashias, the architect, and Brent Poppy, the engineer last time. I don't intend to put any further operations testimony on because there's no change to the operations. We'll have Mr. Shashias come on briefly, the architect, to review some revised plans. The board had some concerns about the look of the facade. We've improved upon it. He'll present that. And Mr. Poppy will come back briefly to talk about just a couple other kind of ancillary improvements that went with that facade work. Just by way of a quick reminder, we are seeking approval for a conditionally permitted cannabis retailer at 272 Bay Avenue. It's the present home of the Chilongos Restaurant and Bar. And we're seeking approval to continue the existing use, conditionally permitted parking lot use at what's referred to as Seadrift Avenue. It doesn't have a physical street address because there's no home or no building there that receives mail, but Seadrift Avenue. The primary relief that we're seeking is D3 variances as to each of those lots, each of those uses. In this strange instance, it's really because the ordinance incorporates a cross-reference to your design criteria. So what we have is a few existing conditions on each of the lots that don't comply, technically speaking, with those design criteria. Like I said, they are existing. None of them are proposed to be exacerbated in any way. And in most instances, with the exception of one or two, we're actually improving upon what's there presently. The two main concerns that I recall hearing, at least from the board last time, had to do with the stylized cannabis logo on the front of the building, as well as, call it an atrium, sort of a glass enclosure that's on the front facade. And Mr. Shashias will testify momentarily that we've replaced the stylized cannabis leaf logo with an anchor, something neutral and reflective of the town spirit, I think, and that we've substantially improved upon the front facade design with something that we believe is in keeping with the goals and aspirations for development in the downtown and the CBD district here. We will also just have some testimony from a traffic expert this evening. It's Mr. Lee Klein, as well as a professional planner, Vina Savant. I have two exhibits that I'd like to pre-mark if we could, just to expedite things.
Exhibit number, are we up to?
I believe we're at A7, and that was the Seagrass NJ interior renovations and commercial fit-out prepared by Shashias Design and Development. The revised date is February the 24th of 2023. It's 4 sheets. It was submitted, more than 10 days in advance of the hearing, and we have it up on a board this evening. I'm just going to mark it as a 7.
While council's doing that, Madam Chair, what I'd recommend, since there are some revisions to the plans, that those revisions have some testimony before we continue the questions, so that the questions can be, related to the totality of the presentation now.
Sure.
And I believe there's also been some feedback from the Monmouth County Development Review Committee.
Yeah, we can cover that as well. Mr. Pappy will mainly address that.
Okay.
I think it's productive, and I think there's some things that we're going to be doing that are overall improvement for the town and for the site as well. So, just as A8, I've got the preliminary and final major site plan, Seagrass NJ LLC, prepared by East Point Engineering, dated November 21st of 2022, last revised to February 22nd of 2023. 10 sheets, also submitted more than 10 days in advance, also present with us this evening. And I would go right to Mr. Shishayas to address the comments regarding the architectural plans at both interior and exterior.
Mr. Shishayas, if you just spell your name for the record again, and I remind you that you remain under oath.
Sure, yeah. Last name spelled S-H-I-S-S-I-A-S.
Is there a handheld mic that we might be able to borrow for the witness?
Yeah, thanks. Quick, thanks. Tom.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Shishayas, we previously marked as A7 your revised plans, dated February the 24th of 2023. Were those prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes.
Okay. Starting with the interior, are there any changes proposed to the second floor of the building, the interior of the second floor?
No, there are not.
Okay. How are you proposing to change the interior of the first floor of the building as compared to what was presented at the last hearing?
At the last hearing, there was questions and remarks about the existing glass atrium that was added on it at some point in the past. So we decided that we were going to completely remove that and actually just utilize that zone as a ramp/access to the front door. So we're no longer going to have the building encroaching in that zone. What's going to be remaining, actually, could be almost easier to look at it in the rendering, is going to be a covered porch, and the ramp would be covered by that porch. That is actually going to increase the waiting room on the interior, which alleviates some concerns with queuing on the exterior. So we have a more, I'd say, accessible to some degree waiting area / vestibule. So this along here is going to be the ramp. And it's gonna basically take up the space, that's under the covered porch right now, so. Yeah, and you can see that in the rendering along here, there's 4 posts, there's a standing seam metal roof. The ramp would be accessed off the corner, that would provide, some protection from rain, but again, primarily, one of the benefits is that there will be more waiting area on the interior of the establishment.
Okay. I think what the board's main concern was the exterior appearance, the front facade of the building. We can pull a picture of what it looks like presently. It was previously marked. Probably much of the board and the public's familiar with the site, but if you just again refresh their recollections as to what the present status of the front facade is.
Yeah, so I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with Toronto. It's very colorful. We're going to be reducing that color scheme to something much more subdued, more earth tones. And this, on the front corner near Bay Ave, that's the structure. Right now, it's almost garden wall, retaining wall block. It's not insulated. It's really more of a temporary structure, as well as like solarium / glass roof and wall. That's a structure that we're proposing to be removed. And instead of the entry door on the left side that you see, and previously we were entering kind of through the corner, taking a bite out of the interior of the building, we're simply going to have a ramp that goes up a slight amount to the front door, and it'll be over on the right side of the building. And replacing this is going to be the standing seam metal roof along the full front of the facade, which is also going to alleviate some of the issues with the front yard setback off of Bay Ave and minor, reduction in building and lot coverage.
Okay. By working with the board's comments and reassessing the facade, were you able to come up with a plan that removes any encroachment into the county's right-of-way on Bay Avenue?
Yeah, slightly. I think we took out about 1.3 feet of the encroachment.
Okay, and
It's not minor.
it's not going to encroach at all at
No.
this point?
No.
Let's see, how about any changes that you might want to review as far as the windows on the front of the building, the doors, access, things like that?
Yep, so on the front, we're proposing that all windows or doors, the only glass door is really the main entry. There's 2 other windows symmetrical along the front, and along the side as well, it's gonna be simply translucent glass, glazing. We have a picture of a similar concept here.
So we can mark these 2 photos, they're not of this site or any other site affiliated with it, but it's just intended to show, kind of this opaque, white-looking glass as opposed to the black glass that the board was frowning upon. I think we're at A9, if I'm not mistaken.
10.
A9, just 2 representative photos, and we'll circulate them.
If the architecture is A8 and the engineer's A10, A9, then that should be A10.
I had A7 on the architecturals, A8 on the engineering,
Okay,
A9 on the photos.
okay.
I'll circulate these to the board, but you can see, this gives you a good idea. This is more of an interior shot. This is an exterior shot of what it could look like from the street, just the glass itself. So you can see, it doesn't give any, view to the interior of the retail. The rest of the facade improvements, the second floor is gonna be typical glass. It's not nothing translucent, nothing like that. Along the front, we're proposing small planters with some sort of seagrass type planting that would be along Bay Ave, and then we're going to have down lighting underneath the front porch and along the awnings on the side of the building. And you can see, as Mr. Anderson spoke about, the more subdued logo along the front, the anchor going where the Torongo's logo currently is. Yeah.
And
One other improvement is the cornice we're leveling out. Right now, there's currently a step at the top. We thought it'd be a more simple, clean look just to level that out.
Just to confirm, you mentioned a ramp, is it gonna be, barrier-free, ADA compliant?
Yeah, it helps with that. It's pretty simple, elegant solution to entering, the front door that's, a bit above grade. And it's wider, so it's not just a ramp, it's more, just a, kind of a walkway off of the sidewalk.
And I made a statement before that in my, untrained eye, that it appeared to be more consistent with what's presently in the CBD zone in Highlands and what they're seeking to foster there. You obviously have the skills, the expertise, the training in that, in your opinion as a, registered architect, is that true?
Yeah, I think the overall look of the building, I think there's a lot of examples of 2-story, flat roof buildings along the, business, district, in Bay Ave. There's a variety of buildings, but, this to me does not stick out as substantially different than anything else. And as I noted before, we're really going with a subdued, color scheme, so it's not something that jumps out at you.
Okay. Were you able to keep the capacity unchanged?
Yes.
I have no further questions of this witness at this time, but I'd invite the board to ask any that they may have.
Counsel, just as a follow-up, because based upon your presentation, you appear to have resolved one element of relief that you needed with the setback. Do you have, whether it's the planner or someone else, is there someone who's going to go through maybe just a list tonight so that we can?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it will be the planner,
Okay.
and so on. In fact, there is no required front setback at 0, but we were worse than 0. We were encroaching 1.3 feet into the county's right of way, so we weren't even on our land. And if this is approved, if the board's so inclined to approve it, ultimately that encroachment would be removed and we would be steps back from the property line where we don't have to be, but we'll have a little bit of space there. Mr. Poppy can speak to it as far as the impact on like site triangles and things like that, but suffice it to say that all the improvements will be outside of the site triangle at Seadrift and Bay.
Okay, two questions. One, at the last hearing, you were utilizing the porch area as the waiting room.
Yes.
Now you move that inside, so I'm confused about why that's not impacting your capacity.
So, the previous plan, I could pull it up, not that you can see it from here, but if you recall, along the front corner, we were basically converting a portion of the interior building to exterior. Think of it as like a ramp that's opening the exterior, pushing within. So there's roughly a balanced square footage trade-off. So even though we're losing that little atrium up front, we're gaining some of that square footage back that we're now not converting to exterior. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
The ADA ramp's now entirely outside of the
I
building.
appreciate that. I'm just curious how losing 10 feet of exterior space doesn't impact your interior capacity number.
Yeah, it was roughly a balanced square foot trade-off.
So you're giving up less retail space for more waiting room area? Or
Yes.
Leaving the waiting room area?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so what's the capacity of the waiting room area?
It's around 17. Oh, sorry. The total retail and waiting area is about 17. And the way the building code works is it's equivalent. So whether we have more waiting or more retail, the total square footage of both is what feeds into the 17 number.
Maybe it's a question for the planner. One of the things that we've discussed that's very important to us is that there's not lines of people on Bay Avenue,
Mhm.
which is why the waiting room being an adequate amount of space
Yeah.
for your expected clientele
Yeah.
was very important to me, and I think to other members of the board. So again, you're saying the total capacity inside is 17 clients, including the waiting room area?
17 total, including the retail, which would also include several employees as well.
Did you testify last time that you were going to have 5 or more employees at one time?
5, I don't recall that. 5 or more employees, what, in the retail area?
I'm just trying to get a sense of how many people walking in off the street are going to be able to go into your building, and how many are going to be standing on the sidewalk if you had like 30 people come at one time.
Yeah, can I bring up, Jen to speak to that? For operations?
Swearing in?
He's been sworn previously.
Can you just state and spell your name for the record?
Last full name?
Can you spell your name for us?
Stephen, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, James, J-A-M-E-S, Whalen, W-H-E-L-A-N.
And just remind you that you remain under oath. Go ahead.
So it's my interpretation of the building, occupancy is 30 in total, in which we could have up to 8 employees, which that means we could have between the waiting area and the service area up to 22 within the area.
Okay, so my specific question is how many seats will be in the waiting area?
We don't,
How many do you anticipate you can sit in the space that you're providing for?
in other dispensaries, we haven't had seats per se. There's just like a standing room. We can put seating in there.
I'm just curious what the plan is.
Yeah, it's because of the flow is relatively quick. We don't plan on having seating necessarily within the waiting room to have more people being able to stand in by that area.
Can you refresh my recollection, if you would bear with me, of what the time frame was you expected each client to be from the time they enter to the time they exit? What's the expected time frame for that?
5 to 15 minutes. 10 to 15 minutes would be a safe assumption for returning customers to know what they want. It's a relatively faster process. We will also be incorporating pickup deliveries, so they'll be walking in, or the package is already set, ready to pick up, and they'll be out within 5 minutes.
Okay, and one other question from me, and then obviously the rest of the board. You're showing awnings now on the
Yes.
side of the building. Don't those encroach into the sidewalk?
They do. The ordinance is it has to be a certain amount of height off the grade. Currently, they're close. We would make sure these conform. If we have to raise them a few inches, they're very close right now.
But isn't the building on the property line?
Yes.
So this would be imposing into the
Yes.
sidewalk?
Yeah.
So I think you're allowed to have the awnings project into the sidewalk as long as they're 7 feet, 7'6".
7'6".
Mr. Herman, is that correct?
I'll double check that. I believe the permit was correct.
Right, open up to the rest of the board.
Mr. Whalen tells me that there are awnings presently. These are just a replacement of a new material.
Okay.
I have one question.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, my math isn't too good tonight, so I'm just gonna follow up with a question. What's your expected capacity? How many people can you handle per hour in that facility?
I don't know that that's an architectural question. Bring Mr. Whalen.
So the question was, how many people were?
How many people do you expect to handle max capacity within an hour?
You know, I apologize. I think actually Mr. Klein, the traffic expert who's done the traffic study, may be better because he studied the ITE as to what this use would generate for trip volume at the max peak hours. So we can certainly answer it. I could swear him now and we can.
Oh, no, we can wait for him.
Okay. We will, I mean, that's the sort of the thrust of his testimony.
Anyone else?
Vice Chair, just to confirm your question, awnings or movable canopies shall be permitted to project not more than 6 feet into any required yard. Where such awning or moving canopy projects into the public right of way, it shall be a minimum 7.5 feet above ground.
Great.
I have a question. So roughly, we're talking about, you said 17 people, 17 in the waiting, then 17 in the other, so the gentleman spoke about 30 people total.
Yes, yeah.
Do you know how many chairs are in the facility right now as a restaurant? How many seats are in there?
I don't know exactly. I think the capacity right now is somewhere in the 70 number.
There's 60 chairs there, just say that.
Okay,
There's
okay.
60 chairs.
I guess for staff and
That doesn't
employees.
include the bar.
Okay,
About 12, 13 in the bar.
yeah. That number sounds about right, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Any other questions from the board? No? Okay, well, at this point, we'll open it up to the public.
Did you want to hear,
I'm
I
sorry.
think there was some more that you wanted to put on from the architect regarding the signage?
I think the architect was just showing the revised logo, the anchor rather than the cannabis leaf, which.
I got a question. Does the signage comply with our ordinance requirements?
Yes, yep. Yeah, the square footage was kind of the primary thing, and, yeah, we're under that number.
Is it going to be illuminated?
What's that?
Will it be illuminated?
I don't believe so. Hold on one second here. Sorry. We're gonna have it will be illuminated with a halo type lighting. And to get more detailed about your question, 15% of the overall building facade is the square footage signage can take up, and we're at about 11%. So we're at about 2/3, and we were being conservative in how we measured that. But yes, I'm sorry, for lighting, we were looking at a halo type lighting around the signage.
And there's no light spillage or anything onto adjoining properties?
It would be, like kind of inward focus, so it wouldn't necessarily be area lighting.
And does the project comply with the ordinance lighting requirements?
Yes, it will.
You've reviewed the lighting requirements in the ordinance?
Yes.
And Mr. Poppy has a lighting plan, with the site plan that he can review.
Okay.
And he may have reviewed last time, in fact.
And then, and I don't know if you're the witness, if not, just tell me who you're directed to.
Yep.
The ADA required parking, so I mean, there's no parking on the property that is the location of the structure. The ADA parking will be in the other lot.
Yeah, I'll defer to, the engineering, traffic planner for that.
As far as the location, you're correct, Mr. Gucciaro. The ADA space is across the street. Feeds into Ms. Tierney's earlier question about some of the comments from the county. The biggest comment, as I read it, is they would like for us to do work to the crosswalk, have detectable warning strips, make sure that the curbing on either side is ADA compliant, and have a crosswalk and signage. And we're, obviously we're willing to do that. If they want that of us, we'll do that. I won't address this.
Recommendation, right?
They haven't taken any formal action. They issued some memos, which we can review tonight. That seemed to be one of the things that was more, I don't know, higher on the priority list. The other things that they mentioned were a little bit more equivocal, but we'll get into those individually.
Well, the reason for my question is that when you look at the parking requirements in our design standards, which is what is referenced in the conditional use ordinance, it talks about requiring that they be ADA compliant. So whoever the person is, I'd like to get a little testimony that it's ADA compliant. You can have an ADA space off of the property that has the structure, and whatever the requirements are for the ADA, they will be satisfied, because if they're not, that would contribute to the D3 variance relief that's required here.
We can certainly offer testimony on it. I will grab the design standards when I have a moment, but my understanding from reading them is that you can comply with the parking requirements either on-site or off, so here we're
The
complying
ADA
off.
is its own, we don't control the ADA, that's its own, state code. So you have to comply with that. I don't know what the ADA provides for.
Okay.
And then just on the loading area, and if you went over this already, I apologize, but do you comply with the loading area requirements?
Are you talking about exterior?
Well, the loading requirements are in the design standards. So, again, I'm looking to compliance with the conditional use ordinance.
So we do require a technical, design waiver standard for that. We're like 10 and change, specified to last time by Mr. Pappy, where I think it's supposed to be 15 feet wide.
Well, it wouldn't be a waiver, it would be part of the D3.
No, we know. So that's been testified to. It'll be testified to further. It's both. It's a design waiver, but it gets elevated to part of the D3. Presently, there's no loading zone on site at all. The testimony was there's a walk-in refrigerator box there. That's being removed to create a loading area. The loading area is adequately sized for a Sprinter van, which is the only type of delivery vehicle that's going to be to the site, and that comes 3 times a week. So that was a testimony last time from operations and engineering.
And then, a question, and again, I apologize if I'm being repetitive, but I'm just trying to get my list down. The solid waste disposal, which is also part of the design standards, is it in the location that is required by that section of the design standards?
So it's located on site. It's in the area where the walk-in refrigerator is, at the rear of what's going to become the loading area, and it's screened from site by fencing. Mr. Poppy's presented on it, but he can address it again when he testifies.
Okay. Is there any inside storage of waste?
The testimony was that there's not very much waste with this use. I mean, right now you have a restaurant and bar that produces presumably, food scraps, things of the like. The testimony from an operational perspective is you're just going to have office type waste. They're not allowed legally to dispose of any kind of cannabis products. The products all come in pre-packaged. You can't tamper with the packaging, so when somebody buys them, they're buying it with the canister, taking it with them. They can't consume on site. There's no boxes or things like that because the deliveries come in reusable plastic totes that the delivery driver takes away with them. So the garbage is kind of de minimis, kind of retail office type garbage, maybe lunches that people are eating. And it'll be privately removed at the applicant's cost.
And then just my last question for now. One of the other portions of the design standards has to do with utilities. I understand it's an existing use and they have existing hookups, but is there compliance with the utilities section of the ordinance?
We haven't delved too far into that, but we would comply with anything required.
Okay, you sure you don't want to take a look at it before you stipulate anything? I'll take it. Okay, that's all I have for now, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Hood, did you have anything to add to this witness?
No, I think, the comment regarding the ADA, I think, the accessible route is typically the obligation. Normally, it would be the closest space to the front door. Whenever you look at a site plan, I mean, that's why the ADA spaces are literally at the front door. This is a somewhat unique condition since it's across the street. I would suggest that that should be a condition, not even if the county said we would prefer you to. I think they should be obligated to do those improvements to ensure that they have an accessible route from the parking space to the front door, which would include the crosswalk, the ADA ramps, and the accessible or the truncated dome pads to make that entire.
Yeah, I'm looking at my client and they're nodding to me, and that's an acceptable condition if the board were so inclined to approve this application. I think county's going to insist upon that one anyway, but yes, certainly.
Anybody have any additional questions for this one? So, at this point, we're going to open it up to questions from the public regarding the testimony that we just heard. There'll be an opportunity again at the end for everybody to give their comment about what they think and their opinions. Right now, it's questions for the specific witness on the testimony that you just heard. And if you have a question, just raise your hand, stand, please give your full name and your address.
So Justin, one second. Nancy, do we need them to go to the?
I would prefer it.
Yeah, we
Or
have
you
another
can
one.
stand.
Yeah, we need to, just so everyone's aware, the law requires us to have a verbatim recording of the meeting, so that's why we need you to get close to the mic. Yes, sir, if you could just state and spell your name and give us your address?
Sure, it's Justin Neely, N-E-L-E, and the address is 26 Cedar. So, I think living on the street, there's some pretty obvious concerns. So, just to go back over the capacity, so we have 30 people allowed inside, 8 are employees. So that means 22. Are any of these people going to ever be outside? Are you allowing people to queue up outside at all?
The idea is that they would be, primarily inside the waiting room.
Well, primarily yes or no. I mean, so
It's a better question for operations. We'll bring Jim back up. Okay, for that.
So we understand the issue with queuing and not wanting lines, and we have a walk and wait approach where there are scheduled timings for coming to order and pick up, so that way we can control the flow. We will have no loitering signs. The security will keep people from standing underneath that covered area or along the sides of the building, so that way you'll get a ticket, you'll be free to walk around the town, enjoy what the town has to offer, come back and pick up when a texting service. If I go to get something to eat, I give them and if there's a wait, I give them my number and text when my table's ready, something like that.
all right, so you understand, so we have a walk and wait, right? So if you live on the street, you're going to have, instead of everybody standing right outside the place, you're just going to be walking up and down the street where we all live, because you do know this is in the middle of a residential area.
So it's in the CBD zone. It is adjacent to a residential area, but as our planner will testify, the goals in the CBD zone are to encourage pedestrian foot traffic, niche retail, exactly this type of thing. We're going to also have our traffic consultant testify. He's going to go over the peak volumes, and he's going to be able to do the comparison with these numbers to convince you that under the IPE standards for the state and the DOT standards, that we're going to be adequately sized to handle the volume expected even during peak hours.
But if there is no businesses for them to be really, not a lot of businesses in that area to really be going around. I mean, there are houses everywhere right there. If you visited any of these other dispensaries, Neptune's a good example. You're looking at queues outside of that one. Sometimes it could be about 100 people that you see from line the street. You have an inside waiting room that has double digits, 12, 15, and then the inside of it has lines set up with these nice ropes in it. Looks like you're at a great adventure ride. I think they say the recreational gets somewhere around like 100 people sometimes in it. You have the medical side of it. It's another 15, 20 people in it. I'm sure you guys have.
So we are not permitted to sell medical.
Okay, so it's just going to be the recreational side, which is always a lot more volume.
So
Than the medical side, it's bigger volume versus the less.
So I think we're hearing that they're going to have one
I
testimony
think that
on.
was not his testimony, that is your proffer.
Sure.
I think what you're seeing like in Eatontown and places like that, I've been told, and I've actually been in the room on the most recent application for Eatontown, their waiting room was only designed to handle medical customers. They did not have a recreational waiting room. So if anybody was waiting for recreational, they had to wait outside. Here we have a waiting room for our only clientele, our recreational clientele. So there's nobody that has to wait outside for lack of a waiting room.
Right, 22, okay. So then the other concern would be, that parking, correct? I mean, if you've been on the street, you realize there's not a lot of parking. I know Mr. Klein said that's
We
why
have
I don't know.
4 times the required amount for the
Right,
use.
so that's a good one. We had 17 spots in the lot when you read the report, or that was the application that was submitted, that was touted a lot, that is 4 times the amount. We had 8 employees. I imagine they drive there. I don't know if they're running out walking, rollerblading, riding scooters, but they're even taking up some of the parking spots, right? So I know math is a little bit of a struggle before, so we have 17 minus 8. If anybody wants to jump in, 9.
We have 13 more parking spots than are required by law in the town for this use.
That's right. We have 17 spots, 8 employees. You have 9 spots left over. Everyone following along real
We
quick?
understand the math, but what's your specific question? They have much more parking than required by the
We
code.
have 22 people that can fit inside the building that we're hearing that will likely be filled, and that's pretty much a goal. 8 spots worth. Where are they all gonna be, where are they parked? I know required 4 times, the amount they need, but you can see where the concern comes in living on the street, on blocks, there's not a lot of parking.
I'm gonna ask the board to cut off the line of inquiry
Yeah,
because we have,
you can make your comments, and it would be very welcome for you to make a statement at the end that you're concerned about the parking, but they've answered your question.
we don't need a parking variance, so.
Correct, they're not here for parking.
Okay, so where the concern's coming in is obviously access to the sidewalk, access to the town that we pay taxes and walk around. If there's people queuing up, there's people going around, you're saying nobody's gonna be queued up outside the building. It's curious, like, so you are gonna have security that's also gonna be enforcing that, correct?
We're required by law to have security.
Correct. So then, is that included in the 8 employees that you're counting on there? I'm just, again, trying to figure out the parking spots. So I'm looking at 8 employees, 17 parking spots, security, which is gonna be outside, is that including the 8 employees that are inside or no?
We have 1 security right now.
One security.
And if we need more, then we have more, but if they're outside, they're not technically in the building.
Okay, so just trying to get an idea of how many parking spots, how many people are gonna be taking up, how many people are gonna be walking over.
Could you say the same for Chalongo, that has 60 seats with 12 cars?
So no, this is your opportunity to answer questions, not asking questions.
I mean, I live on the street, we don't really see that problem, Schwanzers right now, so.
There's also public parking available on the street, and your testimony, your proffer was that there's no businesses around it, so I guess there'd be ample parking for this business.
Right, but there are houses, residential spots like that.
We're getting into the use again, and the
Yeah,
use
and
is permitted in
I'm
the
gonna
zone.
ask you to let someone else ask the question. I'm very happy to let you ask questions to the next professional on the
Yeah.
traffic planning and things like that.
Oh, yeah, that'd be good.
And then you may give a statement at the end, of course.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Who is the next? Sir? Yes, please.
And again, if you just state and spell your name and give us your address.
Yes, my name is Arthur.
Good evening. My name is Arthur Robert Carmano Jr., 50 Cedar, to the architect. I did make the last meeting, but so I'm a little behind the curve. Sure. I'm curious about the rear door. I didn't hear any talk about the rear door. Could you please amplify that?
Yes, there is an existing rear door, which we're likely to maintain because there may be an issue with egress. We're adding a rear door for egress as well. These are gonna be for, employee staff only. This is not public entries whatsoever.
Is this in the rear of the building?
Along the side,
Which side?
street side.
Cedar?
Yeah,
side?
Cedar, yeah.
So there'll be 2 entry doors on Cedar for employees, is that right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And what about, you mentioned deliveries, which is my big question. It's my understanding that there is no curb cut. And I don't know all the details, and I wasn't here for the first meeting. Maybe council can answer it.
We may be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves on the curb cuts because it's an engineering question. He's the next witness. He presented on it last time, but it's changing and improving, so he'll present on it. You can ask him.
Okay, well, I just wanted to know, the van and the delivery, what's your concept of how the van is going to get to the back of the property?
It's an engineering or traffic engineering question. This is an architect.
So the traffic engineer will be testifying, yes, on that
The
question.
next question is the rear exit an emergency exit as well?
Yes.
Okay, so we have the front entrance, we have the rear exit, and is it in your plan that there's going to, or drawings, that there's signage inside
for, in case of fire or
Yeah.
emergency?
Yeah.
That the public will be able to go out the rear door?
Testimony is yes, we're gonna have to comply with all fire code issues, that's outside of this board's purview. And I don't think there was a fire review memorandum anyway, so there's no construction plans, detailed construction plans, because we're talking about a use variance. That's correct.
Okay, but I think everybody's concerned about it, so it's a good thing to answer anyway. We all are concerned. We're here because we're concerned about children, the public in general.
I get it, but I think what we have to all get used to is that the use is permitted in the zone. So those types of considerations don't go to the relief that's being sought tonight. The relief that's being sought solely has to do with waivers from the design standards and bulk deficiencies for rear setback, for lot coverage, for building coverage, for side setback, and for floor area ratio. Because those are cross-referenced in the ordinance for cannabis, it elevates it to a D3 variance. So the standard, as the planner is going to testify, is, does this site accommodate this use, which is permitted in the zone, despite those deviations? Now, all those deviations are existing and they're proposed to be improved. The site presently accommodates it, though it's a restaurant bar that houses 70-plus people. So the planner is going to address that stuff, but we can't be talking about the use generally because it's permitted in the zone.
We're not talking about the use. We're talking about safety. And part of this application is safety and the public safety.
Well, if I could just interject for a moment with regard to the questions about fire safety, and the applicant professionals can correct me if I'm wrong. If there's an approval, let's assume that there's an approval, they still have to go to the construction department to obtain permits for the interior and exterior renovations. And part of the permit process is they have to provide plans that demonstrate compliance with the fire subcode, the electrical subcode, the plumbing subcode, all of those subcodes. And then the plan is either approved or rejected based upon its compliance. They don't give any relief. It's just they have to confirm compliance. And then there's an inspection after the renovations are completed to make sure that those renovations comply with the approved plan. But that falls under the construction codes rather than the zoning.
Okay, so just to sum up, 4 doors, entry door in the front on Bay Avenue, delivery door in the rear, and we'll get to how they're going to get into the rear entry. And then 2 more doors will be added on Cedric, only to be used for staff. Is that correct?
There's 3 doors total. When you were speaking of the rear door, I thought you were talking about the service, storage area. There's going to be the relocated entry door from the left side that's currently for Chilangos. There's an existing door that we're maintaining and a new door proposed. Both are existing, I'm sorry. One we may decide we may close off, but we didn't know once we go through final building permit review, we may be required to keep both. So it's really full. Both would be. On Cedric, yes.
Mr. Shishai, the 2 doors on Cedric, is that because the second floor is presently used as a standalone apartment?
Yes, that's correct.
And now this is proposed to be like office space in connection with the cannabis retailer, so it's only 1 occupant, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
There are no further questions.
Sir?
Steve Sullivan, 205 Bay Avenue. Can you just spell your last name first, sir? Can you just spell your last name?
Speak into the microphone, please, Steve.
SOLOP? Okay, go ahead, sir. All right. I just want to know if there were any studies done, traffic studies with children that walk past that. Well, sir, they're going to have a traffic engineer who's going to testify.
With children and dog walkers?
Well, I don't know. We have to listen to him.
I don't think traffic studies usually take into account pedestrian.
Well,
foot
you have a
traffic.
traffic engineer, correct?
He'll address it, but
Yeah, well, I'm saying this is not the witness to ask that question.
You're correct.
Well, I put it out there, you know, I have 2 grandchildren.
It's not the point for statements. We're asking for testimony questions on the testimony that's just been given.
Oh, okay.
You'll have an opportunity to make your statement at the end.
Can I speak? I was just gonna, that's
So, counsel, let,
I have 2 grandchildren to both of them.
sir,
So,
This is not the time for statements.
You're gonna have the
It's time for
opportunity.
questions for that
well, I
witness.
want to know about the study.
It's
I want
going
to know
to be
about the,
testified on next.
wait a minute, I want to know about the security guard, whether the security guard is inside or outside. Because we're talking about safety. Asking a question.
they testified that the security guard would be outside, I think, correct?
I don't know if that's at all times, but typically speaking, I guess. Flexible, but there will be ability to control some of the, the feared queuing or loitering type things. So it's a product of the CREAM Act at the state level. We're required to have it. We're required to submit a security plan to the police. So we're going to comply with the requirements. Just real quick on the issue of the children and the safety. I mean, any use that draws any kind of patrons brings cars, brings people. This use is no different. There's no consumption of this product on site. Presently, you have a bar there that does, however, allow for legal consumption of alcohol. So, I mean, if you were to compare the two, I'm not saying that they're, any kind of bad operator. I'm sure that they obey all the laws and nobody's overserved. But as between the two, one is serving an intoxicating substance where the other is not serving it for consumption on the premises. So,
We're not talking about bars.
Please be respectful. If you have a question.
Oh, we're not talking about bars. You're letting me answer questions that nobody asked me about.
Sir,
Giving testimony, that's
These
what
are
he's
quality
doing.
of life things.
Everybody's gonna have a chance to give their opinion at the end, as stated before. Okay. Anybody have any other questions on the testimony that's being given?
I have a question of the council that I didn't get a chance to ask at the last meeting.
ma'am, you need to go to the microphone and just identify yourself.
Melissa Peterson, 17 Bay Street. First of all, I'm just like to correct you, the restaurant is not a bar, though it does have a bar in it, so it's a totally different thing.
Melissa, would you mind speaking into the mic? I'm so sorry, we can't hear you.
So if you could refrain from referring to it as a bar, I think we'd all appreciate that. It is a restaurant. Number 2, you said, your testimony at the last meeting, you indicated that it was in the CBD zone because the building itself was 1,050 feet, 55 feet away from the school, correct?
CBD zone, as was testified to last time and will be testified to further by our planner this evening, is a narrow strip of land that runs on Bay Avenue on both sides throughout the majority of the town. You can look at the zoning map, which is available on the website. It's available if you were to speak to Ms. Tran, and you can see what the CBD zone encompasses. Both of the properties in question are located entirely within the CBD zone, which conditionally permits cannabis retailers and conditionally permits principal use surface parking lots.
And last month we had testimony that the building is more than 1,000 feet away from the school.
1,055.
And that's a
parking lot was
condition.
not. Correct.
Well, we had testimony on that as well.
Only that it was not.
But to answer your question, the testimony at the last hearing or the proffers that happened before the hearing, the parking lot is approximately 994 feet away from a school. It's a standalone principal use parking lot. It's not attached to our property. It's not accessory to our property. It's principal use. If you look at the standards for a principal use parking lot, there is no proximity requirement for a parking lot to a school. So you would have to apply the standards for a cannabis retailer to a principal use parking lot. And after having presented this, council at the time, the engineer, agreed with us that those standards don't govern a parking lot because there's no such proximity restriction between parking lots and schools.
But the parking lot is a party to your property, and it doesn't. You're saying a parking lot, there's no prohibition, but is there a prohibition if the parking lot is a party to the cannabis retailer? There's a totally different aspect there.
That's not the case here. They're separated by a county right-of-way, Bay Avenue. They're separate lots. They're going to be owned separately. And we testified that there would be a lease with a memorandum of lease that would be recorded, so that we can ensure that one owner has the continued use of the parking lot. It's going to be used by the cannabis retailer. Your ordinance permits any type of conditionally permitted or permitted use to utilize a separate standalone, conditionally permitted parking lot. So it's allowed in the ordinance, and there's no such proximity restriction to a parking lot.
So you put the parking lot in a different person's name so you could circumvent the rule of being 1,000 feet away
No,
from
that's
it?
incorrect. We had testimony from our own professionals, as well as their professionals, that the parking lot does not count for the 1,000-foot requirement for the use. Very clear. So even though the business is using the parking lot across the street, you don't measure the 1,000 feet from the parking lot, because it's a specific use of parking lot.
We stipulated as well that there would be no retail sales of any cannabis on the parking lot property.
Correct.
Okay, no more questions.
Does anyone else have any questions, sir?
Robert Fischler, Fishler, 20 Gravelly Point Road. Now, I just heard some testimony regarding some security, and I believe that relates to the cannabis rules and regulations, correct? When you were talking about the security?
Correct.
Were any other aspects of the cannabis rule and regulations factored into this particular application before this board?
In order to become licensed at the state level and locally, we have to abide the licensing requirements at the state level and locally.
By way of illustration, one of the items in the cannabis regulations talks about a labor peace agreement and the distinct possibility that there could be a union contract. And as part of that union contract, they very well could require on-site parking for employees. Would that not change your parking requirement, as you stated here, and actually increase it over what the regulation is before the board?
You're saying this is a hypothetical requirement if something happens in the future and it's not a requirement promulgated by Highlands and their land use ordinance?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. If
This application has to be decided under the prevailing law at the time?
Let me finish, counsel. No, let me finish, if I may. There's a cannabis law, and apparently the cannabis law is selectively looked at when making the application before the board. We're okay when we're talking about security, and we can point to security to this entire crowd here, that yes, we're going to have a security guard. But we're not so sure about any other aspect of the cannabis law because it hasn't been factored in, correct?
That's not correct. I didn't say that. You're talking about something that may or may not happen. You admitted that it's a hypothetical, that it's not come to pass yet. You can't decide land use applications locally on what the law might be in the future at the state level. We're going to apply for a license at the state, and they're either going to issue it to us or not. And if they don't issue it to us, all of this is a moot point.
And then,
Madam Chair, if I could just speak on
if they
that.
do issue,
I need to just speak on that for a moment. No matter what the state does or doesn't do, they have to abide by if there's an approval, I'll just preface it that way, they would have to abide by what is approved here. So if the plan approved here does not have parking on site, then they can't comply with the resolution if they want to put parking on site. They would have to come back to this board. So it wouldn't be able to happen unless they came back, what you're suggesting, because it would be beyond what was approved by this board.
I would agree with that.
I agree with your statement. All I'm saying is that there's other factors involved in cannabis law, and I believe they should be factored in any application before any board, anywhere, because if we're doing all this for no reason at all.
So it's very commonplace, as the board knows, as council knows, as their engineer knows, that they will decide an application and they will condition it on things like any required NJDEP approval, Freehold Soil Conservation District certification, Monmouth County Planning Board approval. I expect that if we need any of those things, this board's going to insert those as conditions. So there's lanes, and everyone kind of stays in their lanes. This board is reviewing land use issues relevant to a D3 variance requested for these two sites and some ancillary relief for design waivers and bulk variances. There's no parking variance involved in this application. There's no proposal to put any parking on the cannabis retail dispensary site.
Agreed. If they're going to come back, and now they're unionized, and now they require on-site parking, the board's going to have to...
I don't understand, how can a union require something?
There is not parking.
It's called a collective bargaining agreement. They can definitely bargain for collective bargaining. And it actually has been done in this state. So when you say you can't do it, you're wrong.
Do you have other questions for the architect? Because that's not even an architect's question.
Council,
Not only architects, but if you remember...
Sir,
council,
you're incorrect. Are you talking about the construction process?
Excuse me? Construction.
Because a union can't come in and change our resolution. They can't.
I'm not saying a union can't change a resolution.
Well, it doesn't matter.
But you can have a union, you can have a collective bargaining...
There's no collective bargaining
You
agreement
could
that's
have,
going
and
to
it
change our
has
resolution.
happened, council. It has happened.
It is
Please,
not going to
before
happen.
you speak, let me
You're
answer.
talking about a future event.
Let me answer, please, because that's incorrect. You could have, and it has already happened, a collective bargaining agreement that's going to say that they want on-site parking for their employees. That is going to change the parking mixture of this particular matter, because they won't be able to operate.
It's not possible, sir.
It is possible. It is happening.
How is it possible for a collective bargaining unit to come in and demand parking where there literally is no
Because
parking?
they won't be able to operate.
It's speculative, it's hypothetical, it's not before this board.
Madam Chair, can I just
Please.
interject here? I think we need to curb this a little bit, right? And just because the question was not answered to his satisfaction, doesn't mean we should continue with this. There's a lot of people that want to speak. I think it was answered, and we have to move on.
Anyone else, any questions for this witness? Sir?
I'll defer to the board, but at some point, we're getting kind of a mixture of questions that are addressed to the architect, the
Questions for
engineer.
this witness. We have more witnesses to go, and then time for your public statements.
Hi, Martin Kiley, K-I-E-L-Y, 39 Shore Drive. So, I'm really confused at the moment. Is the board accepting the application based on the land use and the parking?
The parking
It's about that.
The parking is part of what they have to prove.
So they need parking in order to get their cannabis license, is that correct?
We're not giving a cannabis license. We're here to grant
I'm sorry.
a site plan.
You're right.
A site plan approval.
In order for the site plan approval to occur, they must have the parking, is that correct?
They must show that they either comply with the parking requirement or ask for relief. So yes, parking.
So then, could you please explain for me how the parking is not how it does not conform with the 1,000 feet if it's a necessary part of the land use that's being proposed?
Because it's on a separate lot. And our ordinance actually talks about accessory uses being on the same lot. So this is on a separate lot. On that lot, it would be its own principal use, which is permitted as a conditional use. So it's not a cannabis use under our ordinance. It's an independent parking lot that is permitted under the ordinance. So if it were part of the lot that has the building, then we would make the same measurement from the lot lines. but this is its own principal use. Our ordinance requires it to be a principal use and it permits it, in the zone, so you don't count the 1,000 feet from that line.
Got it. So, excuse me,
I was just
sir.
gonna amplify
I
and
don't
clarify.
need any amplification. I'm really upset about you grabbing a mic away from me.
Sir,
I apologize. So, if the question is about Highlands doing two separate entities, one land use for a building and another one for a parking
no,
lot,
it's not,
then
That's not,
that's not what I said.
Maybe I can clarify. We've had applicants come here who own two properties next to each other.
Sure.
And one is vacant. And they want to build a storefront with two apartments, let's just say. And there's not enough parking.
Right.
But they own the one next door. They say, you know what, we're going to give two parking spots up from next door to satisfy the requirement here.
Right.
And that's been approved. So I think that's what's going on here. There's a lease agreement that says, okay, we're going to lease these two parking spots, and that satisfies
Right.
the requirement.
Got it. For this board, it satisfies the requirement.
For the ordinance.
for the code in the
Got it.
For the
Okay,
ordinance.
so if there's a question about the use of the parking lots for the cannabis, then it's not before this board, but it would have to go to the state. If they're,
No, none of this has to do with the state, sir.
Our attorney has said that it's, according to our ordinance, it's a standalone thing.
So the design criteria says you can have required
Sir, you're
parking.
interrupting me again, and I
Yeah,
only have
counsel.
3 minutes.
Well, we're also supposed to be taking questions for their witnesses, and you can ask your general questions and make your statements later.
So my final question, which is, I guess, maybe before this board, maybe not. If the existing structure is 1.3 feet into the county line, are they going to cut that back? And when they do that, which they testified that they will, are you going to have a glass enclosure? Because it sounded like you were just having a shed.
Okay, let's let them answer the question.
It's going to be open front porch. An open front? Yes. So people will be waiting on an open front porch. What you saying?
That's not
You
the
said
fact.
there was a queue, didn't you?
Well, sir, let-
There is no queue, and the operational testimony is they will not be waiting on the front porch.
Then what is it for?
It's an ADA ramp.
So people are not going to be waiting on that ramp whatsoever.
The ramp is for access into the building, and it's a simple solution to get without having stairs and things like that, so it's a way into the building.
Okay, so if you have an anticipated number of people which somebody is going to be testifying to, where are they going to stay? If not but on a line,
There's an interior room.
that will only hold X number of people. If you have excess people to what you're proposing in the interior of the buildings, where will those people stay? Will they stay on that porch?
We may want to get to the traffic engineer who's going to testify to the anticipated peak volumes of customers that will be
You
coming
have
to
a
the site.
pedestrian engineer? How can a traffic engineer?
He can testify to that and let us know if there's even such thing.
Okay, I think we have one more question from you, sir, and then we're going to move to the next witness.
My name is Tony Camerata. I live at 63 Seadrift Avenue, so I'll keep my questions specific to the architect. One is, well, actually, I'll have 2 questions. One regarding safety, the security guard, other one the architecture of the property. So, and they're both related. Is there a safe? Is there any, so on the security side, how is the product itself secured in the evening when the facility is closed?
We'll bring up Mr. Whalen on operations to answer that.
All product is CRC regulated to be stored in a vault that is locked and key card access only, and beyond the CMU block that the structure that the vault will be at now, it cannot just be an empty search down. You have to be able, it'll be a caged section inside the vault and inside the CMU.
Thank you. Where's that vault located?
In the back.
And so the security guard would, I guess, inside or outside, be close to that vault. I just bring up the concern because there is a higher incidence of theft, criminal element when it comes to these facilities. And it is close to a neighborhood. So where it is, and just one more question, will the guard be armed?
You can answer the question, but I just take an objection to the proffer that there's a higher incidence of criminal activity.
Well, whether there is or isn't, it's not one of the things that the municipal land use law allows us to look at. That would be something maybe at the state level, that would be, looked at for their cannabis license, but that's not part of our ordinance book for zoning and design criteria. That's what.
So the security guard will be on, will be a retired police officer. And the access, to get approved by the CRC, we have to have a detailed security program that we've already put in place and submitted. And that has to go for their review before they even accept it. The security plan is extremely detailed and has multiple cameras on every exit and entrance, the only key card or fingerprint access. And those cameras are linked to the CRC for their constant monitoring, as well as the police department, if the Highlands Police Department wants to monitor that as well. The security guard will have access when product is going in. Once that door is closed, there is no way that that door can be opened, and the security guard will be, that time will have multiple security guards. Thank
We're ready for the next one.
Yeah, we'll bring back Mr. Pappy. He was sworn, at the last hearing, Mr. Tierney.
Mr. Pappy, if you just state and spell your name for the record, and I remind you remain under oath.
Yes, my name is Brent Pappy. Last name is spelled P-A-P-I.
Hi, Mr. Pappy. We previously marked your revised plan in as A8, I believe. Was that prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes, the site plans were prepared by myself.
Okay. Would you, kind of review any of the changes that the board and the audience should be aware of regarding the site plan?
Sure, and in an effort to not be over redundant, I'll try to stick to the site plan and some of the information that's relevant. As mentioned by the architect, the applicant had opted to remove the waiting room that had originally protruded into the right-of-way. On the survey, just for correction, that extension was 1.78 feet at the left side and 1.82 feet on the right side. The new ramp, covered ramp at the front of the building will pull that setback from 0 to 1.3 feet back into the property. So what was once exceeding the right-of-way is now behind the right-of-way. In addition to the improvement of the front of the building, we've made one other minor change. The testimony I provided at the last meeting was that there'd be a loading zone at the back of the building. That loading zone had a depressed curb that was 10 feet wide, and after looking at it, we decided to make that a little bit wider. We had it at 13.6 feet wide, which the traffic engineer will explain just to aid in the turning maneuver slightly.
There were a few things that there was a mention of a county review memorandum. First of all, has the county seen the revised plans yet?
The county hasn't taken any formal action on the application. They only have reviewed our original submission. They haven't reviewed any new revised plans yet.
As far as your understanding is concerned, they look favorably upon the removal of that waiting room area from their right-of-way?
That's correct.
Okay. We stipulated we would do the ADA improvements that they wanted at the crosswalk, which was also a comment of Mr. Herman, and something that this board, if they were inclined to approve it, wanted, right?
That's also correct.
Okay.
In addition to the handicap ramps and some painted striping for crosswalks.
So, I don't know if it's a better question for you or if I should save it for Mr. Klein, who will be next, but do you understanding that the site triangle that the county is discussing on this particular application, that all of our improvements as far as the retail cannabis dispensary would now be outside of that site triangle?
That's correct. In-depth conversations and made sure of that, and the traffic engineer will elaborate on it.
Okay. Would you just quickly review your updated zone table? I believe there were a couple changes, but I just want to confirm that none of the existing nonconformities are being exacerbated. Is that right?
That's correct.
We made some slight improvements, with the change at the front of the existing building, where they just mentioned the front setback went from 0 to 1.3 feet, which is an improvement. And also complies, the building coverage at Lot 12, had been reduced from 77.9% to 77.6%, which also complies, from what was previously proposed, and the lot coverage also.
Just to clarify, it doesn't comply, but it's more compliant.
It's more compliant, I should say, yes, from the existing. And also the lot coverage reduced from 100% to 99.7%, which is more compliant than the existing and the previously proposed conditions.
I have no further questions of this witness, but I'd invite the board and their professionals to ask any engineering type questions they may have.
Okay. Mr. Herman?
Mr. Poppy, could you just speak to the rear loading zone again? I think there was some testimony last time, there was some concern regarding the accessibility. I think your testimony was that a Sprinter van would be the largest delivery type vehicle that would be expected to use that. In furtherance of the widths that you have available and the depressed curb that you said you widened out a little bit, would you envision the vehicle having to back into that space, and would the driver then have enough room to open the doors and successfully operate in that area?
I think you'll appreciate you put up some effort into that, answering that, and I think the traffic engineer will address it. I assisted him with preparing an exhibit that he's going to speak to, showing the vehicle turning maneuver. Yes, I did testify for the new loading zone space was 19 foot by 10.8. We felt that was adequately sized for a Sprinter type van that's anticipated, and there's also fencing around that area and so forth for screening.
And Mr. Herman, to your question, last time one of the members of the public had a question about an armored car, or whether that could fit on site. There was some discussion that the car would park across the street. I believe that the applicant has discussed this with their bank. They can testify to it, but I think the statements were that they have a van type vehicle similar to a Sprinter that would be able to use that loading zone as well.
Just for purposes of the resolution, if there is an approval, when you talk about a Sprinter van, what is it, like SU-30 or something around that size?
Yes, we have the size on the exhibit. So in the,
go ahead and
sure.
Mark this one really quickly. I've got a pen for you. I think we're up to A10, is that right, Ms. Tran?
So the van is,
would you just describe the exhibit and give the date?
yes, it's a titled The Delivery Vehicle Turning Template, March 7, 2023. And it's been prepared through myself, utilizing Autodesk vehicle turning software. And it is US design vehicles you can select when you're running the maneuvers. This is a Sprinter drop side crew cab. It's 18.2 feet in overall length and 6.5 feet in overall width.
So what my question was, just for purposes of the vehicle that we're limiting it to, was there more precise, like a wheelbase?
Yeah, there's other dimensions here. There's a track width, let's see, the track width is 6.5 feet, and there's a turning radius of 20.17.
So what size truck is what I'm saying?
There's no specific, like WD or designation. It's a special size vehicle for that specific use. So it's a Sprinter. It's called a Mercedes Sprinter drop side 211 CV1 short crew cab is what it's defined as.
So then is the testimony that that's the only make of vehicle? I mean, you're never going to get a FedEx or a UPS or something like that?
Those presumably wouldn't fit in that loading zone. So the testimony was presently there's no loading zone at all. So if they get like a Cisco food delivery or something like that, that big huge truck is parking right on the street and unloading. So here the testimony is Mercedes Sprinter vans are going to be the predominant method of delivery. The delivery is highly regulated in the state, obviously, because it's a controlled system. formerly a controlled substance, but now a licensed and regulated substance. So we expect that that would be predominant mode of delivery. If there were larger vehicles for any reason, I guess they would have to use the street, but I don't believe the operations testimony envisioned much of that. You know, maybe a WB Mason, like an office supply thing occasionally, but I don't think it's going to be a daily or weekly thing.
And there were other smaller size Sprinter vans that we could have run, but I ran the larger vehicle.
And I asked this up front, but I'm just gonna keep asking questions like this. But what you just described, compliant with the off-street loading in the design criteria, or, you know, you've done the best you can, but you still need relief? Section 21-65.13. I don't know that you necessarily have a specific size for off-street loading. Certainly, I'll cop to the fact that I'm not quite sure what no loading or delivery area will be permitted on any street frontage means. I kind of take that to mean on street, like you know, you demarcate your own loading zone on the street, which of course we wouldn't do. That's what it means, I think. It probably means, and I'll defer to Ed also, but I would think it means like in the back, you know, where you don't have any street frontage, you know, on a traditional lot. You know?
Clearly here we're a corner lot, so the only way you can get a vehicle in there is from a street frontage, the Cedric Avenue street frontage. So if you read it that way, then I
So
guess.
it's not how the vehicle gets in, it's where the loading area is.
All right. Well, so under your interpretation, we don't require a design waiver for that?
I asked you.
It's unclear to me. If we did need it, we would be asking for it.
Okay. All right, so we'll come back to that with your planner also. All right, just wanted to make sure.
Anyone else have any questions? Do you want to, we'll maybe roll the next witness together with this and then open up the comment of the witnesses?
I think that's a good idea, Ms. Tierney. So we would, we'll have to swear this fella. This is his first appearance. His name is Lee Klein. I'll bring him up. He's our traffic engineer.
Mr. Klein, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state and spell your name for the record.
Lee, middle initial D as in Daniel, Klein, K-L-E-I-N. I'm principal of Klein Traffic Consulting out of West Orange, New Jersey. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. My license is current and in good standing. I'm also a nationally certified professional traffic operations engineer, and that national certification is also current and in good standing. I've appeared before other boards, Red Bank, you've been accepted. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, Mr. Klein. In preparation for this application, did you familiarize yourself with the subject properties?
Yes.
Okay. The Highlandsboro parking requirements?
Yes.
Okay. Did you prepare the report entitled Traffic Engineering and Parking Evaluation, prepared by Klein Traffic Consulting LLC, dated January the 27th, and previously marked into evidence as A2?
Yes, I did.
And would you review your report, sort of your methodology and what you ultimately concluded?
Certainly. So as traffic engineers, we rely on the Institute of Transportation Engineers to develop trip generation numbers for the uses that we're proposing. What we did is we looked at the trip generation for the existing restaurant of 1,500 and some odd square feet, and we looked at the trip generation from the ITE for the proposed cannabis retailer.
You'll also look at the second floor apartment that exists?
Yeah, which is going to make it. We also looked at the apartment that was upstairs. There was one apartment, or currently there's one apartment upstairs above the restaurant. And then we looked at the proposed office that's going to be on the second floor. The existing uses, the restaurant and the apartment upstairs, in the morning peak hour would generate 22 trips. And again, they're parking across the street at the parking lot or throughout the neighborhood if they're walking there. It would generate 26 peak hour trips during the PM peak hour, which is 1 hour between 4 and 6 PM. And on a Saturday, during one peak hour,
site currently generates 18 vehicle trips. The proposed use,
Sorry. For those that may not be familiar, could you just explain what a trip is?
certainly a trip is a vehicle moving in and out of the site, and in this case, the parking lot across the street. So when I say 22 vehicle trips in the morning peak hour, it's 12 coming in, 10 leaving. The PM peak hour, 14 coming in, 12 leaving. And then on the Saturday peak hour, 9 coming in and 9 leaving. Then we looked at the trip generation of the proposed cannabis retailer. That is going to generate approximately 26 trips during the AM peak hour. And as you heard, we're going to be open from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and Sunday 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So when I say the AM peak hour, it's going to be after the typical 7 to 9 AM peak hour of the street. During the weekday PM peak hour, the proposed retailer is going to generate about 37 trips, 18 in, 19 out. The office will generate a trip in and a trip out. On a Saturday, the retailer is going to generate 22 trips coming in 1 hour and 22 trips leaving in 1 hour. And the apartment, in the office upstairs, again, 1 trip in, 1 trip out. So the delta, the change in trips when we convert it from the restaurant to the retailer is an additional 5 trips in the morning peak hour, approximately 3 in, 2 out. 13 additional trips during the weekday PM peak hour, 5 in and 8 out. And about 28 trips on a Saturday, 14 in and 14 out. I looked up historical traffic volumes on Bay Avenue from summertime of 2018, pre-COVID. We found volumes that vary from day to day, hour to hour. During the AM peak hour, traffic volumes in 2 directions, anywhere from 270 vehicles an hour to 325 vehicles an hour. PM peak hour on a weekday in the summer, 375 to 450 vehicles per hour. And we're generating, as the numbers I said before, we're generating a percentage, approximately 10%. So traffic volumes vary by more than 10% from hour to hour on a weekday. So the additional traffic that will be generated by this development would not be noticed.
When you say we're generating, is that the existing use or the proposed?
The proposed use. The proposed use. And like I said, we're really looking at the delta, not the actual numbers that I said before. So we're looking at an additional 5 trips that the restaurant normally generated 21. We're looking at 26 trips. When we close the restaurant, open up the retailer. So when we look at traffic generation, and we look at the number of trips, the hourly number of trips, if it's less than 100 peak hour trips, both New Jersey DOT and the Institute of Transportation Engineers say that that's not a significant increase in traffic. So because it's not a significant increase in traffic, I'm not doing an analysis where I count cars at the intersection, add the trips from the retailer, do another analysis to see if there was sort of a change, because when we're looking at such low numbers, 20, 25 trips, we're not looking at a significant change in traffic volume, so therefore the level of service will basically remain the same. Then we look at the parking. The ordinance 21-65 14D 7A requires 1 parking space for every 600 square feet, with a total, including the upstairs, of a little less than 2,400 square feet. We require 6 parking spaces. And as you've heard before, we have 17 parking spaces in the parking lot across Bay Avenue. 4. Right, what is it? I'm sorry, 1 for 600 is for 4, I'm sorry. So some questions were raised earlier about 17 parking spaces, 8 for employees, only 9 left for customers. As you heard earlier, some of the people that would be here that would be, let's say, first-time customers would hang around for about 15 minutes. They come in, talk to the operator, ask questions about the different offerings that they have there, and ask some questions. And then he also stated that there'll be some people that will be in and out because they'll make an online order, come in, go to the online order, pay for it, and leave, because that'll be quick. So when we're looking at the peak hour on a Saturday is 22 coming in and 22 coming out. When we look at 9 parking spaces, and each of them turns over every 15 minutes, that's 4 times in an hour. So 9 parking spaces used 4 times each per hour is 36 customers, where we've only got 22 customers coming in the peak hour. So we have ample parking for the customer demand that we're anticipating on the peak hour of a Saturday.
Just to be clear, that was giving allowance for all the employee parking, so you're only counting the parking that would be available after deducting for employees, based upon the turnover that this site could expect under the ITP standards. You're saying that the remaining parking that's not designated for employees, or not utilized by employees, is more than adequate to service the anticipated demand even in the peak hours?
That's correct.
The peak hours on a weekend?
That's correct.
Which are the, sort of the biggest volume of the week?
That's correct, yeah, 44 trips on a Saturday peak hour, 37 on a weekday PM peak hour.
Mr. Klein, I don't know that everybody in the public understands what ITE is. So
The Institute of Transportation Engineers.
If you could just explain what that is and why that's really relevant.
Certainly, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, it's a compilation of actual data that traffic engineers like myself, we go out and we go to different uses and we perform traffic counts. So we'll go to a development that, let's say, has 100 homes in it, and we'll do counts during the peak hours, and we'll send that data to ITE. They'll compile that from all over the country, and then we get these average rates per home. So if there's 100 trips coming out, each home generated 1 trip in that peak hour. So
And
that's the number.
And that's the source that all traffic engineers
That's correct.
use.
That's correct. And we're in the 11th edition right now.
Okay.
And can you elaborate a little bit on how you determine what the expected numbers are for a business with a use like this one?
Certainly, the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation 11th edition tells us based on every 1,000 square feet, there's a certain amount of trips that will be generated. So when we plug in 1.5 or 1,500 square feet, we get these numbers, 26 in the morning, 14 coming in and 12 coming out. So we have these numbers that they give us a rate per 1,000 square feet, and then they give us a distribution, how many come in that hour and how many would leave in that hour.
I'm sorry, to be more specific, for this specific use, because obviously...
Yeah, yes, for cannabis, marijuana dispensary, correct, yes.
And so they're assuming there's a turnover. What happens if there's not a turnover? As quick as you're saying 22 in and 22 out an hour. So how do you know for sure it's 22 in and out? It's the same calculation? You're assuming 20 people are coming in an hour, 22 are going out in an hour?
It might not be the same 22.
Right.
It's just when they did counts at cannabis dispensaries, they did the counts, they figured out how many square feet that building was. They did it at another one, how many square feet, they put together a graph, and they show that per 1,000 square feet, it works out to be these numbers. So then you plug in your square footage, and it tells you how many trips you should expect.
So again, you might have heard us ask the question about capacity, and that's something we're very concerned about, making sure there's sufficient capacity inside the building so that there's no people waiting outside. Do these metrics make that assumption previously represented by council that there's going to be sufficient waiting room inside?
As you heard from Mr. Whalen, if there happens to be a spike in the amount of customers that are there, they'll be able to tell people, give me your cell phone number, we're going to text you when your turn is ready, and they'll, just like if you go to a restaurant, sometimes they'll do that, rather than wait in front of the restaurant, take a walk, go back to your car, whatever.
So just to answer Ms. Tierney's question a little bit more directly, I think what she's saying is, assuming these stats hold true, right? And stats, I mean, you might have high points, low points. This is a statistical compilation. On those stats, is the waiting room adequate?
Yes, because we're going to get 22 in, 22 out in the hour, and we're looking at 30 is the capacity of the...
Minus the employees.
Correct, so that 30 minus 8 employees is 27.
Right, so a very narrow margin or error margin.
It could actually be, it could be lower, it could be a little bit higher. But again, we have the operational plan that if there's more than enough people that can fit, they'll be told to come back.
And again, I just want to come back. There's a really relevant question, Ms. Tierney. That's a good question. This is on your Saturday peak hour. Can you just go back to your weekday, your AM, PMs, and the weekdays? Because they were much lower, right?
Sure, yes. I mean, again, this is 1 hour on a Saturday. The other hours on a Saturday would be lower. they found the peak is the peak hour of a Saturday. On a weekday, it's the peak of the peak, yes, the peak day, peak hour of that day.
Can I, Susan, we heard testimony from another applicant that they expect seasonal increase significantly in the summer. Is this a general month, or is this a winter versus summer analysis?
This is a general.
So you're not taking into consideration an expected increase in use during summer hours?
This is a general trip generation for a typical day.
I mean, this, we don't know, this could be summer, this could be winter.
Correct. I don't know that the data that's in the ITE, I'll answer the question, but I don't know if the data that's in the ITE was determined whether it's what season of the month it is.
What is the max, this might be a question for the operation person, by the way, but it's relevant to this, and that is, what's the max capacity that you can handle in the facility before there's spillover? In other words, before there's a wait. If you to say you could handle X number of clients per hour.
22, because there's that capacity for 30, 8 employees.
Okay.
And 22, and that matches the number that we have from the ITE.
That's 22 at any one time.
At any one time.
Right.
In an hour, though, getting 15-minute turnover. What's the capacity of the facility before things back off on you? So with how many customers can you handle in 1 hour?
I'll venture my best effort at it, maybe you guys can confirm. So assume the worst case scenario, you're a newbie customer that takes the 15 minutes.
Right.
If you were really busy and you had 22 people in there at a time and they all took 15 minutes, I guess you could have 88 in an hour?
You'd have 88 in an hour. Yeah.
Under your hypothetical scenario.
Why are they successful? God bless you, too. So, but if you're wildly successful, there would be 88 people traveling through the facility in 1 hour.
Assuming they all stayed for 15 minutes, which is like the newbie time versus a regular versus a pickup. And assuming you never had any vacancy, you were always at capacity all hour long.
So that's the expert not talking. When we talk about, when we talk about trip generation and when we talk about capacity of things, we look at 85th percentile. We don't look to get the maximum 100. Yeah. There are times, think of a unit, Christmas time, a shopping mall.
Right.
There's vacant parking around there, and by Christmas time, it fills up. So typically, we're looking at that, if you're looking at one month in December, that's the worst case for a shopping center. But the other 11 months, not a problem at all. So if you were to look at this as an average, there may be some times when there's more, but there also may be some times when there's less people.
Okay.
So it's an average.
Sometimes it's relevant to look at the averages that you do professionally, but there's also relevant to look at what's the max exposure you have. And that was my...
Right, and that's what I was saying, I think that's more like 36, because we have the parking to be able to handle every 15 minutes, that's 36 customers coming in, coming out, and out.
I guess I'd point out, like, if you had a larger site theoretically with more space, and you ran the same analysis, you'd have more space, but you'd have more people coming in and out, so the larger site's not necessarily helping things.
Mr. Klein, in the 11th edition, do you know how many touch points they reference in terms of actual empirical data?
No, I don't know that off the top of my head.
It's pretty limited, is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
I think the last edition, I don't know if it was the 11th, I saw there were only like 4.
That sounds right.
And in terms of the size, I think what I had seen in there was that really, once you get over about 1,000 square feet, it wasn't a significant difference with the 5,000 square foot facility versus the 1,000. It was really just about a tiny issue, I think, more so than anything else. Is that, so in your experience, have you done any cannabis facilities anywhere, either in the state or out of state?
I have, but they haven't opened yet.
Well, I think it's fair to say this is a fledgling operation in the state of New Jersey. There aren't tons of touch points. I think really the only thing you can practically do is compare what's there today, which the testimony was there's 70. roughly 70-seat restaurant with its own dynamics and its own specific times and turnovers, and if people are in a restaurant, that could be an hour to, an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending. So I think that's all kind of taken into consideration as part of what you have to surmise as the operation of this different facility as it relates to the current facility and the current parking lot to service that facility.
I think that's an excellent observation. Mr. Herman, can I ask you on those touch points, and I'm familiar with the Neptune dispensary that was mentioned, the Eatontown one. Do you know if either of those were surveyed or part of this analysis?
I don't believe that, right?
I mean, just logically, I'm thinking they're both on, state highways, so, I don't know, I'll allow the expert to make the proffer, but, if you're on a state highway, it can be a little bit different than Bay Avenue, which, although a county road is sleepy based upon his, 2018, pre-COVID, analysis of NJDOT teachers.
You just brought it up, if I have a question for you. You brought 2 facilities. Do you know how many municipalities there are in Monmouth County? 53 counties, municipalities in Monmouth County. Do you know how many dispensaries there are right now at the facility? In the whole county?
I'm aware of the 2. I'll proffer to you, I think there's 17 trying to get into Red Bank. Is that right, Mr. Herman?
So let's talk about that here, because there's 2 in the county right now. So from your analysis with these other ones, the traffic is supply and demand, right?
Correct, yes.
So do you know how, I don't know if you did research, do you know how many municipalities are allowing cannabis retail in those towns out of the 53? You know how many, but there was a deadline. The municipalities had to say yes by a certain deadline.
I can name a few. I maybe question my operations witness on it. I know Middletown is a no-go, right? They're not allowed. Red Bank
Would you
is...
say it's 25? If
non-scientific, but the sworn witness, Mr. Whalen, saying 20 to 28, is that right?
So 20 to 28, so we're going from 2 to 30.
And like I said, I mean, Red Bank presently at least has no limit on licenses.
So now we're gonna have 30, right? So the lines, the traffic that you're talking about, they're gonna shrink.
Correct.
Because they're gonna go to your local stop, you're not gonna, people coming out and are driving here.
Correct. Right, just like when the first Chick-fil-A opened, people drove from miles around, and then as they opened up more.
I think they're still driving.
They're still there, yeah, you're right, they're still busy. I remember the first Starbucks, things like that.
So I have a question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the simplest thing, like the traffic study, is we're only assuming moving cars and no other alternatives, right? We're just looking at moving cars within this traffic study, and that's it, right? Just the moving cars, and we're not looking at any other alternatives, just moving cars. Would that be right?
Typically, the trip generation are vehicle trips. Sometimes they give you a breakdown of pedestrians and vehicle trips. But for now, I think because it's a limited study.
Right.
It's just.
So I think it's important for us to know that it's just looking at moving cars solely and no other alternative impact stuff like that. So
That's
you
what
say-
my analysis.
Okay, so I
if
said
there are
limited
more-
analysis.
Right, and more customers could be walking, correct.
People could walk across the street for any business.
So let's not hope
Everybody.
So I think, that is something that, I don't know, it's for your testimony, that all of the parking for this building will be across the street, so that everybody who parks in that lot comes to the business will have to cross the street. You've heard testimony that the county's suggesting improvements to walkways and things like that. Is there anything from your point of view that you could testify to regarding the pedestrian impact of Bay Avenue, of the number of people having to cross the existing traffic on a regular basis to get to this business?
The restaurant had pedestrians that would park in the parking lot and cross over to go to the restaurant. In both directions, they were open late at night. This is closed at 7 p.m., 5 p.m. on a Sunday. Doesn't open until 10 a.m.
But the restaurant definitely would generate this type of business as this though.
They didn't have that turn.
Yeah, you can't even see someone in there in the majority.
If I can compare what I had from the trip generation from ITE, again, apples to apples, ITE numbers for the restaurant, ITE numbers for the dispensary, on a Saturday, yeah, it's about half, about 17 versus 44.
and then I'll put on a weeknight, evening weeknight, about 25 versus 37. That's just based on the square footage. If I did it based on number of seats, it would be more than what we're expecting at the dispensary.
And you're not testifying to the impact of all that traffic, all that pedestrian traffic on an hourly basis crossing Bay Avenue to get to the establishment.
Sight distance is good in both directions. People will have a marked crosswalk, they'll have pedestrian crossing signs. We may do the ones with the flashing LEDs around the perimeter, so we'll be able to, that'll be an improvement to what's there now.
But it does not address any alternative and impact other than moving cars.
I understand.
If you're saying 22 and 22 out an hour, that's just car traffic. There could be multiple more people walking in,
Right.
Biking, scooters.
It's just based on moving cars.
22 is the cars, and then there could be additional customers that walk, ride their bike.
Right.
They can already be on the right side of the
We
street.
can't get a maximum capacity in an hour from the traffic analysis, I think is the point we're reaching, correct?
To Chief Burton's point before, I mean, we would welcome people to walk there, we welcome people to bike there. We are in a downtown business as opposed to a state highway. We're probably likely to get, aside from maybe some of the folks tonight that maybe don't consume, maybe not our customer base, but we're probably likely to get those types of trips, bikes, walking, in lieu of cars, because we are in an area where people can conveniently walk there. And so that further ameliorates any of the, the traffic or the parking issues, but I don't think there are any based upon this testimony.
Anybody else on the board have any further questions?
Mr. Klein, one follow-up question. In terms of what's commonly known as the peak hour, right? I think most of us are familiar with peak hour generally being during work hours, right? When you're leaving to go to work in the morning, historically that's sometimes 7 to 8ish. Afternoons it's typically 4 to 5, 5 to 6, depending on traffic counts or whatever. A business of this nature would probably be a little different. Is that a fair assessment? It wouldn't be coincident with what you would historically consider.
Well, again, we're not going to be open until 10 a.m., so we're not going to be during the 7 to 9 a.m. peak hour commuters. During the evening peak hour, it could be a lot of pass-by traffic. So people that are on their way home from work, or on their way from another location to another location passing by, could also stop by. Similar to when you might stop at a liquor store on the way home, pick up a six-pack on your way home.
And one thing, we were talking about kind of the worst case scenario, how many customers per hour. We did base that on the 15-minute thing. If you dialed it back and you did it on a 5-minute, you could redo the math, you could handle a lot more capacity. The people that are going to be walking there presumably live in a neighborhood. They're not going to be first timers, they're going to be regulars, and they're going to be more in that 5-minute category because they're going to know what's up.
Yeah, just want some confirmations. When you look at the T&M report, the T&M report had identified multiple areas of design waivers that were going to be required with regard to the parking lot. Are those design waivers still all required, or have you done anything to satisfy?
I did not design the parking lot, so when it comes to design waivers, I have to leave that to Mr. Pappy.
So I can probably speak briefly to it because I worked with Mr. Pappy and Ms. Salant to put together the list of design waivers for, Mr. Herman's review. I'll have the witnesses testify to it, but I think we have confirmed that 7A is actually not a required waiver here. That's the distance of the existing driveway at the parking lot to the intersection. I think we comply with that. Once the witness is sworn, the planner will confirm. We talked about the cross easements. We're certainly happy to do, I don't know, there'll be an easement here, it'll probably be a lease with a memorandum of lease recorded at the county. We're meeting the requirements of the parking, but off-site, which is allowed.
On that, it does talk about
delineating the parking by a treated wood guide, and that they clearly be delineated. Did you look at those parking requirements?
We'll bring Mr. Pappy back up on that one.
And then, there was some statement about the sidewalks that are, the encroachment, but also just the general sidewalk. There is a sidewalk section in the design standards. Have you reviewed that?
Why don't we address the first question, which was, are we willing to put wood guides to demarcate the parking?
In the previous testimony I provided, we had indicated that the parking spaces would be painted on the curb, as well as have, they're called the easy markers that are recessed into the gravel, and they're detailed on the detail sheet 12, I believe, of my site plan. So there's delineators in addition to painted stripes on the curb.
Okay. And then talk about the sidewalks that you were referencing.
I'll grab the standards out for the witness and we can speak to that.
I testified that we were replacing the sidewalk completely along Seacrest. So it's shown on the site plan, there's a hatched area where the entire length of sidewalk along Seacrest would be completely replaced, as well as the ADA ramp per the county's requirement. And as far as the sidewalks leading from the handicapped parking space, we're planning on replacing those sidewalks as well.
There is design criteria for the sidewalks in 21-65.17. Are you going to comply with those design requirements?
He's reading them right now.
Okay. And then
I see no issue with complying with those references to the thickness of the concrete, the vehicular apron. We have no problem with that. I believe the details on the site plans comply with that. Section A, class of concrete strength, we comply with that as well. And the graded areas to be planted or treated, those are detailed on the landscape plan.
Okay, and then just going back to the parking spaces, do they comply with the dimensional requirements and the section for non-residential zone and uses in the off-street parking section?
We'll confirm that momentarily, Mr. Cucciaro.
Okay.
When I last checked, they did, but I'll double check.
It says in general, 90-degree parking spaces shall be 9 feet wide by 18 feet long.
Then yes, they do.
Okay, and parallel parking, I don't think you have any parallel parking.
No, I do not.
Okay.
And our drive aisle width is 24 feet, which is required in section 6.
That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Is there anything in the ordinance where it's supposed to be in a discrete location?
Well, the ordinance does have certain zones that it's in, that it's a permitted conditional use in, and within those zones, you look to the conditions as to the types of properties that were envisioned, and one of the conditions is compliance with all of these design standards. So council was correct. What they have to prove is that even though they don't comply with several of the design standards, the site remains suitable. So, at some point, it's going to be the planner who's going to have that burden of proof. We need to understand, why was this a conditional use rather than just a permitted use? Why were those conditions imposed on the property? What were these conditions meant to address? What were they meant to protect? What were they meant to provide safety for? And the fact that they're not being provided, does that still render this property suitable? So that's how we look at the suitability for this particular piece of property.
So there's nothing in there that says it must be discrete?
Well, that's, the word discrete can be interpreted in many ways, but there's filtering requirements, and I think the applicant requires relief from that. So they have to show you, there was envisioned that the use would have a buffer and would have other details that would create a certain look. It doesn't say discrete, but there are elements here that talk about how the site is supposed to look in order to be harmonious with the surrounding area.
So just to kind of, it's a good question, to kind of expand on it. So these are the general design criteria for, this is any use whatsoever. So this is like the measuring stick. If a use wants to locate and they have to follow these design criteria, this is like the book. It's 23 pages long of requirements. And so we've complied with like nearly all of it, save a few. I would submit to you, I mean, any other use, whether it's cannabis, whether it's something else, very hard to comply with 23 pages of design criteria. So frankly, it's a little atypical that a local ordinance would reference their design criteria when they're giving conditions for a D3 variance. Usually it's a very short, small list of things, maybe 2 to 5 things, and they don't incorporate in design criteria because design criteria is design criteria. There's a separate legal standard for it. When you cross-reference it in, you're elevating what's a simple design waiver, which is really easy to come by. You're not elevating it to a D3 variance. So that's atypical. We're going with it. I mean, I could probably take a different reading of the ordinance that it's either invalid as a matter of law to cross-reference the design criteria, or that the way that it's written, the design criteria stay design criteria and don't actually trigger a D3 variance. We're kind of suspending disbelief and saying, well, okay, we're going to come in for the D3 variances because we deviate slightly based upon existing conditions from these 23 pages of regulations. But I mean, it's very, very nuanced and very, very detailed design criteria that you're applying to an existing site that's already developed. And as far as the parking lot's concerned, I think we only missed like maybe one at this point. Our planner will testify to it, but otherwise we comply with every other piece of design criteria.
I would just say to that, I mean, I'm familiar, Brook Township has several conditional use standards that reference their ordinance, other sections of the ordinance in totality. And with regard to how to apply it, we don't have jurisdiction to tell the governing body we've adopted an ordinance that's invalid. You know, that's for, you know, if someone wants to challenge that, they can go to court. We're not here to sit in judgment of the lawfulness of an ordinance.
We're not challenging it, and we're going with it. We're asking for the relief, but just observe that of the 23 pages of requirements, I mean, 99.9% of them we do comply with.
Sounds a little ambiguous, but because I guess, I mean, there is things where I do believe that, you know, it should, you know, be discrete. And how do you define that? And is discrete meaning in, as we've talked about, again, I'm just making an observation. I'm not holding an opinion. I'm just, you know, not, you know, a observation where, you know, this is permitted use, right? Permitted use. That's why you're here for it. But.
Well, it's actually, if I could just say, it's a permitted conditional use and they don't meet the conditions. So they're here for variance relief also.
Right. Correct. So, again, but then we're talking about, is it discrete?
Well, here's what I think is important to get across. Well, what you're looking at is what do they comply with and what do they not comply with. If you make a determination that the purpose of the sections that they don't comply with are to create a use that is discrete, that's the lens that you view it through. But not to say, are you discrete or not discrete, you have to look at the sections they don't comply with, make a determination as to whether one of the purposes of those sections is to create a discrete use, then you can assess it that way.
But you understand that the buffering requirement is meant to
I think that's better after the applicant has presented his planning testimony. She's gonna, the planner's gonna go over all of that, but those are the exact types of questions that, you know, are legitimate to ask the planner.
And it's a good question. I would just observe, as far as the buffering is concerned, you allow a 6-foot high fence, which is what we've provided for, so it will be discrete in that regard. I'll let the planner come up and get sworn. So just to address the discrete comment really quickly, and we did testify that there will be no advertising at all outside. That's not allowed by the state. We're not doing that. We've removed the cannabis leaf from the building at the request of the board, so it's just an anchor, and it says the word seagrass. The windows will be the opaque glass that we testified to, so you cannot see in from the outside. We will only be able to sell to people 21 or older. The only specific criteria for the cannabis uses that really address that use is you can't have a consumption area, indoor or outdoor, on the site. We're absolutely not doing that. That's a complete stipulation. We're not doing it. It's not allowed. We're not doing it. And the only other thing is you can't have the cannabis retail dispensary within 1,000 feet of the school. And under our calculations, as well as Mr. Herman's, we're more than 1,000 feet from the school.
So one question I had, I think, at the last meeting was, what are you going to do to make sure people don't leave your establishment, cross the street to this parking lot and use the parking lot?
We'll bring up Mr. Wayne. I want to know if it's on that.
Repeat that question.
How are you going to guarantee that people don't purchase the product in the building, go across the street to these parking lot and use the parking lot?
We testified last month on that we would have cameras and surveillance on. We testified last month that we would have cameras on the parking lot at all times.
That's going to stop. Who is monitoring the cameras?
That means the CRC, security, I mean, there will be monitoring of the cameras. You know, there's management in the office. The CRC does have access to those cameras. It's tied into the whole security system. I mean, it's the same as, I mean, we will not be able to monitor them parking on the side of the street and in any location in Highlands should anything be.
I think Chief Burton said it really well last time as well, which was to say, paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong, he said that it is illegal to consume the cannabis in public, and that would be a police issue. If somebody were to be doing that, they would be risking, I guess, some sort of ticket. Warning. What happens the second time? Anything more severe? A stern warning.
We're going to let the planner testify and then we'll take all questions on the tenant.
Chairman, can we take a 5-minute break?
Of course. Yeah. Let's take a 5-minute break. Everything is only for members who get to use the laboratory and then laboratory, and then we're going to thank you for your patience, everybody.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state and spell your name for the record.
Veena, Veena, last name Sawant, Sawant.
Ms. Sawant, if you put your professional credentials on the record, please.
Sure. I'm a professional planner licensed in the state of New Jersey. I'm certified nationally by the American Institute of Certified Planner. I hold a bachelor's degree in architecture from Mumbai University, India, and a dual master's in urban planning and policy making from NYU. I have been practicing for almost 17 years. I have testified before numerous courts in Essex, Bergen, Middlesex, Monmouth County, Burlington County, and I currently serve as the planning director for Old Bridge Township.
Will the board accept the witness's credentials?
Yes.
Ms. Sawant, in preparation for this application, did you review the Highlands 2016 master plan?
Yes, I did.
The borough ordinance?
That is right.
The applicant's site plan and architectural drawings?
Yes, I did.
The review letters?
Yes.
Have you visited the site?
Yes.
Okay.
I also reviewed the 2021 CPD redevelopment plan.
Thank you. Would you review the site, swing right into the list of variances that are being requested this evening, address the legal standards, and give your opinion as a licensed professional planner as what it would be?
Sure. So I'll keep it brief with the property description because I know everybody has heard so much about the property already. But the project involves two parcels, Block 72, Lot 12, and Block 73, Lot 2, located within the northeast and the southeast quadrant of the intersection of Bay Avenue and Cedar Avenue. The two parcels are fully located within the CBD zone, where cannabis retailer use is a permitted conditional use. The applicant has elected to be reviewed under the CBD zone ordinance. However, there is a redevelopment overlay zone, which is also important to the development of the surrounding properties. The property located at 272 Bay Avenue consists of a mixed-use building with a bar restaurant on the ground floor and apartments on the second floor. The property across the street, I would refer to it as a Seadrift Avenue parcel, contains a surface parking lot that serves the restaurant use located at 272 Bay Avenue. Tonight, the applicant is proposing to adaptively reuse the existing mixed-use building for cannabis retail use. There will be changes to the interior of the building. The second floor of the apartment will be demolished, the interior walls will be demolished, and a storage space and an office space will be created instead. The refrigerator that is located to the rear side of the building will be removed so that a loading space is created. Since the property is fully developed and almost has 100% lot coverage, the existing lot coverage is 100%, we are proposing to put in a 6-foot-high vinyl fence on the north and the east side of the property in lieu of the landscaping. In addition, we are proposing planters along the Bayview Avenue street right of way within the sidewalk. I'll go straight to the variances. First, the use variance. A D3 conditional use variance is required for the property at 272 Bay Avenue, and that is where the cannabis retailer use will be located. The cannabis retailer use is permitted as a conditional use, provided that it meets two of the conditions. One is the distance from the school district, which is 1,000 feet, and the other one being that there will be no consumption indoor or outdoor within an area for cannabis. The third condition, which is actually part of the description, is that every design standard be met, and that is why we are in front of the board, because we do not meet some of the conditions, some of the design waivers, and those all of them, in fact, are existing conditions. With this proposal, we are actually alleviating some of those conditions. In fact, none of them are exacerbated. So we are improving the current site conditions, and so that's for the parcel located at 272 Bay Avenue. A D3 variance is also, you know what, I'll step back. With the design waivers for the D3 on the cannabis retail, the first waiver that we require pertains to buildings, and this includes the side yard setback, the rear yard setback, the building coverage, the lot coverage, and FAR. So all these are existing non-conformities.
Can I just stop you
Sure.
there? Those, though, are not within the design standards, right? Those requirements?
They are actually a part of the design standards. So section 21-65.1, it pertains to buildings, and all the bulk requirements are included. That's where there's a bit of a contradiction. It counterfeits because it's also C variances as well as it is part of the design standard.
It's like a cross-reference within a cross-reference, because it refers you to the design criteria.
I
agree.
Okay. And then just, you also mentioned the FAR. So do you need, aside from the D3, do you need
Yes.
FAR there? Okay.
I'll get into that too.
All right.
So first, there are two D3s, one for the cannabis retail use. There's a D3 for the principal use parking lot. There's a D4 for the building located at 272. And then there are bulk variances that were already part of the D3 for the cannabis retail, but I'll keep that at the end.
If they're part of the conditional use, I would not, certainly it's your case, but if they're a conditional use standard, I would just apply it under Coventry, rather than.
I think you're right. There is case law that says if you make your proofs on the D3, the Cs are subsumed. So we're going to be talking about them either way.
So the second waiver pertains to the driveways. Commercial driveway widths are required to be 15 feet. We are at 10.8 feet. And however, based on the revised site plan, the depressed curb apron has been increased to 13.6 feet to allow better turning movement for the vehicles. The third waiver is from section 21-65.10C2 pertaining to landscaping and street trees. 10% of the lot shall be landscaped based on this condition. The existing and the proposed landscaping does not meet this requirement, hence a waiver is required. Now I will switch to the D3 for the principal parking lot.
I'm sorry, can you just go over the sections again for the D3?
Sure, I'll listen. So first one is section 21-65.1A, which pertains to.
You can just give me the numbers. All right, so 21.65.1A, what's the other one?
65.5C1.
Okay.
65.10C2.
Okay.
And that's for the parcel located at 272 Bay Avenue.
And also the bulks that you were talking about as well.
There was one other, Mr. Crucial, that you had mentioned about a loading zone on street frontage. So as an abundance of caution, the expert doesn't believe it's a waiver, but it's.
I did review while there was discussion. I did review the township's, the borough's ordinance. There is no definition for street frontage, and it says that the loading area cannot be located within the street frontage. I'm assuming a loading area cannot be on Seadrift Avenue or on Bayview Avenue. Our loading area is behind the building, which is to the rear side of the building. It does not jut into the frontage, so I would say that we comply.
And but I talked about a couple bulks that were cross-referenced.
Sure. So a side yard setback variance is required. That is section 21-91A4A. A 0 feet setback is required. However, if one is provided, it has to be 5 feet. And the applicant proposes 0.61, which is existing.
And then building coverage, right?
That is the side yard setback. The next one is Schedule I, 21 Attachment 1, which pertains to rear yard. 12 feet is required, whereas the proposed 10.8 feet, but the existing is 2.1, so we are alleviating that setback. The next one is for building coverage. Schedule I, again. The CBD zone allows 35 feet. We are proposing 77.6%, and the existing is 83%. So again, we are alleviating the condition. Improving. The lot coverage, the permitted is 80% in the CBD zone. Currently, we are at 100%. We are reducing it to 99.7%. So if you notice, all the bulk variances have been reduced. The relief sought has been reduced as much as we can because this is a fully developed site. We did eliminate the waiting area in the front as well as the walk-in refrigerator located to the rear side of the building. In terms of D3 for the parking lot, the Seadrift parking area, I'll finish the D3. For the parking lot, we only violate section 21-65.14 D2, which requires that a commercial lot adjacent to a residential district maintain a rear yard setback of 12 feet for parking space. This is an existing condition and will remain unchanged. The last one is D4. The CBD zone requires 0.65. The existing building is at 1.31. With the proposed demolition of the refrigerator and freezer, the proposed FAR will be at 1.26, which is again reducing from what it was before. Now going to the proofs, right?
We are.
You're done. Sure. Now pertaining to the proofs, the Zoning Board of Adjustment has the power to grant a T3 conditional use variance, in this case the Land Use Board, pursuant to NJSA 40:55-17 D3, in particular case or for special reasons. Previously, the codes required the same proofs to be submitted for a D3 as same as a D1. However, the Coventry Square versus Westwood Board of Adjustments changed the ideology, which insisted that the board's focus on the review of this application shall not be on the use, because the governing body has already decided that the use is conditionally permitted. But the deviation requested by the applicant, so the focus should be on the deviation, and pursuant to this case law, as it pertains to the positive criteria for the D3, the board's focus must be on whether the site remains remains appropriate for the conditional use, despite the failure to conform to all the conditions of the conditional use. A conditional use variance applicant must show that the site will accommodate the problems associated with the use, even though the proposal does not comply with the conditions the ordinance established to address those problems. I'll take you straight to Cox Book section 34-2.2, which reads, this pertains to D3. This leaves the focus of the board entirely on the particular suitability of the site in accommodating the use despite its failure to meet the conditions. First, the board must consider whether there are particular features of the site that ameliorate or entirely offset the failure to meet the ordinance conditions, and then whether there are conditions the board could require that would offset the failure. The focus will then turn to the site suitability considerations that arise in consideration of the negative criteria. The negative criteria should follow the two-pronged test. The variance, whether the variance can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good, whether the variance can be granted without causing substantial detriment to the zone plan. Now, the borough allows a cannabis retailer to operate within the CBD and the highway-oriented business zoning district as a conditional permitted use, provided the retail use does not lie within 1,000 feet of any school, and provided there will be no indoor or outdoor cannabis consumption. Additionally, it requires that all the standards of Article 11 design standards be met. It is relatively easy to design a building or put a building on a property that is vacant and meet all the bulk standards. But when I studied tax records and I started looking at properties along Bay Avenue, it appears that most of these parcels are smaller, and they're as small as 2,000 square feet. So if I have to comply with the building coverage standards, which is the allowed building coverage is 0.35%, if I apply that, only a 700 square feet building could really be placed on those sites. So on one hand, the governing body has made cannabis retail use as a conditionally permitted use, but by including the design standards, especially the bulk standards, into the conditions, it actually counterfeits, because even if we were to propose some other use, which is a conditional use, and we look at Bay Avenue, there will be every building will not be able to meet all the design standards that are listed, or even the bulk standards, more specifically the bulk standards. Pertaining to the two design waivers required for Lot 12, located at 272 Bay Avenue, the requested waivers are for bulk requirements of the existing building as it relates to side yard, rear yard, building coverage, lot coverage, and FAR. As explained earlier, these are existing non-conformities. This is an existing building, and the project does not exacerbate any of these non-conformities. The project, on contrary, makes every attempt to lessen each one of the bulk deficiencies, including building coverage, lot coverage. I'll explain these bulk deficiencies in detail later. The second waiver is for the width of the drive.
We're going to end at 10, so if you have things that you can shorten, because we're very familiar with the.
I was going to say, is your testimony different than anything that the other professionals have?
I think by law, and maybe the council can chime in, by law.
What I would say is, they really need to make their record.
Sure, I agree.
The planner.
Because by law, I'm required to put certain proofs. I can't skip them. I'll try my best.
Skip them.
Right. I'll try my best to shorten them.
Thank you.
But,
I think it's your case, counsel. Take the time that you need.
I think it's okay.
Why don't I just try to go quickly through the things?
Sorry, do you take honey and just being conscious of the fact that if we need to move to next month, I just wanted on the record that we're going to end at 10 tonight. So you take your time, do whatever you feel like you need to do, and we'll have to hold over questions and testimony for next month. But I just wanted to let you know we're ending at 10.
Ms. Sawant.
5 minutes, 5, and then you'll ask some questions. Right? Right. So, essentially, here we are, right, asking for variances on existing non-conformities. I have said so far, I have explained, whether it's building coverage, whether it's lot coverage, whether it's the side yard, rear yard, we actually are trying to reduce the relief that existed and the relief that is sought. We have tried our best to enhance the building. I know at the last meeting there were some comments that remember, you're within a redevelopment zone, and we are trying to beautify or revitalize Bay Avenue. So what are you doing for the building? And we addressed that. We took those comments seriously. We revamped the facade. We have nicer looking awnings, a nicer facade. There was a comment about signage. We took that into consideration. We redesigned that sign. There were comments about safety, ADA compliance. We tried to address each one of those comments. With the parking lot that is across the street, I heard a lot of comments, and I do want to address some of it. When you have a restaurant use, the busiest time for a restaurant is in the evening. when residents come back home, you want those spaces, on-street parking, wherever parking is available for residents. When there is a restaurant use, which is open till 11 o'clock, those spaces are somewhat taken by the patrons of the restaurant. We are proposing a use that closes at 7 p.m. And I think Mr. Klein would agree with me that every use has different peak times. In our case, our peak time is during the day when most residents go to work. They don't require parking. That's when we are parking, and we are providing a parking lot. It's not that we are not providing parking. We're providing more than what the ordinance requires. When people come back home in the evening, our business is closed. So there will be no on-street parking occupied by the patrons of the use. That was one thing. In terms of the variances that have sought, we have tried our best to reduce those. So I think we meet the positive criteria. There will be no negative criteria because the current situation, you have a restaurant which has a 60 to 70 patron capacity, whereas we are proposing a use which has, including the employees, 30, and it closes at 7 o'clock. It will not have negative impact. You've had a restaurant use that deals with odor, garbage. This is a very clean use. The operations has already testified. There will be no noise. There will be no smell. The garbage that is created is much smaller than a restaurant use, and it will be transported away from the site. So I believe that the benefits of this use outweigh any detriments, and I don't believe there are any. And I will stop there and have John answer the question.
I'd like to ask you specifically, we're talking about, on the retail dispensary, whether the site accommodates a cannabis dispensary despite the fact that it has technical deviations from the ordinance requirements. I want to go through those. You mentioned the side setback. Now, there's no side setback requirement at all whatsoever, is there?
There is not.
Okay. But if you happen to have a side setback, it has to be 5 feet, is that right?
That is correct.
We have an existing condition where our side setback to another lot that's going to be owned by a related entity is 0.61 feet, is that right?
That is correct.
Would this use function any better if that setback were 0 feet?
No.
Would it function any better if that setback were 5 feet?
No.
Okay. We have a rear setback. It's presently 2 feet and change. We're improving it to over 10 feet, but we're not improving it to 12 feet because there's an existing building there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say that it is a de minimis relief that we're seeking because 12 feet is required. We are at 10.8 feet. And
is there anything particular about this use that this use can't operate on this site with 10 foot as opposed to a 12 foot rear setback? Okay. Building coverage. You said it was presently close to 100%? Maybe.
So presently it's 83%. We are reducing it down to 77.6%.
That's an existing condition that's improving, correct?
That is correct.
Would this particular use function any better on this property if it had less building coverage?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Lot coverage, same thing. Existing condition proposed to be improved?
Yes.
Would the site function any better or better accommodate the use with less lot coverage?
No.
Okay. Floor area ratio. We have an existing condition. We're improving upon it, correct?
That is correct.
Would the site function any better if we were compliant in terms of floor area ratio?
No.
Similarly, the parking lot. Okay?
I don't believe you can actually put in a fully operational building, any use, with the way the standards are written, because it caps it at 35%, so the building would be much smaller. We discussed that.
I think you talked about the driveway width being 10 feet with a 13-foot opening, where 15 feet is required. The testimony was the Sprinter vans are only going to be using it.
That is correct.
Would the site function any better if this were a 15-foot driveway?
No.
Okay. It's sufficient to accommodate a special event.
Yes.
Were there any other issues designing waivers of the landscaping on this particular site? Would a cannabis retailer function any better if it had 10% of the site landscaped?
No.
Okay. Has the applicant provided ample landscaping on the adjacent site where there is room?
That is correct.
Okay, so they have ameliorated that condition by providing another site adjacent.
That is
That's, have I missed anything on that site?
No, I just want to add a couple of things which come to my mind. One, the applicant I know the ownership has testified that there is a wall along Seacrest Avenue which is currently left blank. It's just shown as a mural space. But the applicant is willing to work with the community if there is a local artist who wants to come and paint that wall and create a mural. We will be happy to work with them. There is a sign on the parking lot, the historic sign, and the applicant agrees to refurbish that sign and make it look nicer. There is a wall, a retaining wall, a lower wall along the parking lot side, which is in state of disrepair, and the applicant agrees to fix that as well. So,
have I addressed each of the deviations from the design criteria and the bulk standards?
yes.
Okay. Once again, any of those particular things, do they make this site unsuitable in any way for a cannabis retailer?
Yes.
Let's talk about the parking lot. There's one design deviation, is that right?
That is correct.
It's an existing condition?
That is correct.
Okay. And what does that deal with? It's a setback to the parking?
Yes, it's the setback to the property line, especially when it's next to a residential district, and it remains unchanged.
Have we done anything to ameliorate that condition in any way, such as through buffering of any sort?
We do add a fence there to screen it. There used to be a shed in the parking lot, which was closer to the property line, and we have agreed to remove that.
We've also added peripheral landscaping.
That
right?
is correct.
Okay. And we've contained any of the light in the site, downward directed LED,
That
not
is
going to be
correct.
any spillover.
That is correct.
Okay. Would the site with the parking lot function any better if the parking were located 12 feet from the site?
No.
We have adequate drive aisles. Our spaces are adequately sized at 9 by 8 feet.
That is
And
correct.
we have 4 times as much parking as required.
That is correct.
Okay. Can you review any type of findings that you may have made in the master, if you review the master plan?
Yes.
We're looking for things that make this use consistent with the master plan.
So, in reviewing the 2016 master plan and the municipal land use law, there were a couple of things that struck to me and which are really relevant to our project. Is one of the recommendations is to promote the revitalization and aesthetic appearance of Bay Avenue within the CBD zone through public and private partnership. I think we are willing, and we have worked a lot. We have taken all the comments that were made by the board members to address most of them. The other one is strengthen commercial district, especially the Bay Avenue CBD, by encouraging a mix of uses that provide employment, retail opportunities, services, and entertainment. I believe the applicant had testified that as much as possible, they will try to hire locals. The next one is continue the improvement of commercial properties in the borough. Again, the existing building is, you will agree, is not so attractive with the architectural changes that are being proposed and the facade improvements to make this building look much nicer and more aesthetically pleasing. Provide for adequate parking to serve established residential and commercial areas. We do that by providing a parking lot across the street, which has more than ample parking that is required by the parking ordinance. Encourage redevelopment of commercial properties that need rehabilitation or improvement. Again, it goes to the aesthetics part of it. With the municipal land use law, we Advance purpose A, to encourage municipal action to guide appropriate use or development of all lands. The applicant proposes to add an ADA accessible ramp to the entrance of the building and also provide handicap accessible space within the parking area where none exists. The applicant agrees to comply with the flood proofing required by NJDP. Purpose D, to ensure that development of individual municipalities does not conflict with the development and general welfare of the neighboring municipalities. The county and the state as a whole, we are consistent with the state law here. To provide, purpose G, to provide sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of agricultural, residential, recreational, commercial, and industrial uses. And purpose I, to promote a desirable visual environment through creative development techniques and good civic design and arrangements. That I think we worked really hard to improve the parking lot as well as the existing building.
Mr. Cucciaro was referencing some case law that says if you have a D variance where you're already making your proofs as far as bulk criteria, that those C variances are subsumed. Are you familiar with that case law?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Really quickly, in the event we did need to make proofs on those separate C variances, which was side setback, rear setback, building coverage, lot coverage, would we have what's termed as a hardship under the law on the positive criteria, in your opinion, as a planner?
Yes.
Based upon
the existing site, it's fully developed. The lot coverage right now is 100%. We are over the building coverage, so there is very little room for us to improve. We are doing as much as we can do.
and you'd have to lop off half of the building in order to comply with those criteria.
That is correct.
Okay.
I think the C variances can also be presented in terms of the C2 analysis, because the benefits of those variances outweigh any negatives, and throughout my testimony I have described the benefits of the variances that are sought and the improvements that are being proposed.
I kind of racked my brain on these applications. We already testified you can't get any of these variances unless you're not substantially impairing the zone ordinance or substantially detrimental to the public good. Let's talk about like, nuisance type factors, right? Things that might be associated with this use. Loading. We don't have it presently, is that true?
That is true.
Though we have a restaurant, a full service restaurant.
That is correct, which has much more loading activity than the site.
Now we're going to have 3 deliveries a week in Sprinter vans.
That is correct.
And we've still been able to accommodate those things on-site where no on-site loading presently exists, is that right?
That is correct.
Sorry, odor, is there any appreciable odor from this use?
No, there will be none.
Refuse, is the refuse increasing or decreasing?
It is decreasing significantly.
Okay. Traffic, we heard from Mr. Klein. Is the site able to accommodate the traffic?
Yes.
Parking, do we have adequate parking objectively under the ordinance?
Yes, we have more than the required.
All right. Noise, are you seeing any appreciable noise impact from this use?
No.
Okay. Hours of operation, anything detrimental about the hours of operation? Light or glare, anything like that that would impact adjacent properties? Can you just round it out and just, based upon everything we discussed, are these sites suitable for the 2 uses proposed on them?
I believe so.
Despite the deviations from the
Despite the
technical
deviations,
requirements?
I believe so.
Are we exacerbating or making worse any of these existing?
No, we're not. In fact, we are reducing every condition, every relief zone.
In your expert opinion as a planner, having heard all the testimony, reviewed the plans, reviewed the purposes of zoning, reviewed the 2016 master plan, seen the site, can these 2 sites accommodate the 2 uses proposed despite these deviations from the very technical requirements of the design?
Yes.
I have no further questions of this witness at this time.
Manager, I have some questions. There's a lot of talk and testimony about the pre-existing conditions on the site. Is there a prior approval or any history on whether the site predated the ordinance or whether variance relief was granted associated with the use that's there?
So we did an OPR request to try to find records, any prior approvals that may exist. I think you got a couple issues. One is the building may be fairly old, though the use is not that old. Number two, you're in a flood-prone community, and I understand you may have lost, quite a few of the records. Number three, much of the records are archived, so your poor land use secretary was kind enough to try to take dates around when Chilongos may have been approved and go to the archives and grab boxes and comb through them. But as of right now, I am not in possession of any prior resolution of approval.
The reason I ask is, there may have been specific reasons that variance relief was granted, and it would be useful to see how the reasons that are placed on the record stack up with the reasons, if there were any, that were part of a prior resolution.
And of course, if we were previously granted, then we wouldn't be talking about this because those variances would run with the land.
Well, run with the land for that particular use. So I'm not sure I agree. On FAR, I'll start with that. That one you didn't give as much testimony to as the D3 variances. What's the purpose of an FAR ordinance or FAR requirement?
To control the bulk of the building and the square footage,
The intensity, right?
the intensity.
Yeah, and that comes out of Cox's book also on the floor area ratio section. So when the governing body adopted the floor area ratio requirements for this zone, what were they seeking to control then?
The intensity.
So, why is this intensity addressing what the governing body was seeking to limit?
I mean, as I said before, when I was looking at the entire CBD zone, right, most of the properties within the area are much smaller. So, on one hand, we have a redevelopment overlay zone when we are trying to revitalize the downtown. And typically, when you're revitalizing a downtown or creating a Main Street-like setup, the floor area ratio is much higher so that you create a streetscape. So,
I've got a question that's kind of a follow-up that might succinctly answer it. If we elected to be governed under the redevelopment standards, which likewise control the zone, is there any floor area ratio requirement whatsoever?
I don't believe so.
But you're not proceeding under that section.
Well, but all the surrounding uses may, in which case we're going to blend seamlessly in with people who might be more intense than us because they elect to be governed by them.
So just on your testimony regarding, I guess, impracticality of the FAR requirement, is that a fair assessment of what you're testifying to?
Yes.
Isn't that a critique on the legislation rather than a testimony as to why it is that particular intensity requirement exists?
I'm not a planner.
Why are you talking?
We just point to the fact that at present, the second floor is an
I'm
apartment.
just gonna ask everybody to be not rude. I know we're retired, but these people deserve our respect, even if you disagree with them. So please stop talking, laughing, and making snide comments, or else we'll ask you to be removed. Thank you.
As far as the existing use, the second floor is an apartment, which is a less intense use objectively than a restaurant. As far as the proposed use, the second floor is going to be back office space only. It's not open to customers, which is a less intense use. You see in the building, it's pretty modestly sized. You do have very restrictive legislation in the CBD zone on the FAR requirement, though if another use were to come in and take an adjacent lot, if they did a permitted use, they would not have any FAR requirement at all whatsoever.
I believe, just to chime in, and I believe the redevelopment plan was written for a reason. Probably, I mean, I don't know who the planner was, but probably knowing the shortfall or the repercussions of what the standards are for CBD, they created an overlay so that what exists could continue to exist, but then you have a redevelopment overlay zone that allows you with a higher FAR, a bigger footprint, and helps you create that streetscape. Because a downtown can only be successful if you have a continuous street frontage. When the FAR is smaller, there are going to be gaps between buildings, and you won't get that street frontage. You won't get that vibrancy that a successful downtown requires.
How come you're not proceeding under the redevelopment plan? Why are you seeking the FAR variance rather than just comply?
The reason being is that with the benefits of redevelopment, or when you, I mean, I do a lot of redevelopment planning in other municipalities. One is the pilot, and two is when you are seeking deviation from the redevelopment plan, then you would still, I believe the redevelopment plan has to be rewritten or amended, and that's the reason why we chose to go by the CBD standards.
That's not a viable avenue for anybody who needs a D variance. They can't elect treatment under that redevelopment plan. So we're not electing treatment under the redevelopment plan.
So
what I'm saying is our peer lots could, in which case they would be unencumbered by any floor area ratio.
And the redevelopment plan also allows these uses as conditionally permitted uses. Again, the condition is that it meets Article 11 of the Land Development Ordinance, so we would be violating some of the same variances, but then the redevelopment law doesn't allow you to come in front of the zoning board and seek those variances. So it would be better to defend the case under the CBD zone requirements.
Okay. I just consulted with Mr. Pompey, who's been sworn, to get the overall square footage of the lot itself, which was 2,300. So your floor area ratio requirement is 0.65. So you could only have 1,495 square feet of floor area, even if you had multiple stories. So if you had a two-story building, like what's presently there, you can only have 700 square feet per floor to meet that requirement. Now, the existing building is closer to 2,400 square feet. In order to comply, you'd have to take the existing building and you'd have to lock off 1,000 square feet of it to comply with the floor area ratio requirement. That's impractical. That's a hardship. So what we're doing is we're removing as much as we can, which are things that are kind of ancillary, like the walk-in box or this atrium in the front, but we're not disturbing the existing building, which is.
I know your arguments, Council.
Just I want to add one more thing. In
You can add as
reviewing,
much as you want, because it's your testimony that we're interested in.
in review of Bay Avenue and the tax records, there are other buildings that potentially have higher FARs as well, because those lots are smaller too. So there is a pattern along Bay Avenue.
But despite that pattern, the ordinance still has a standard, despite.
That is correct, and probably that's why an overlay was created.
What do you base that on, that an overlay was created in order to eliminate, or actually, let me just ask this, you're stating that the redevelopment plan was created in order to eliminate the FAR?
I don't think so. The redevelopment plan was created for the overall revitalization of Bay Avenue and to create a Main Street-like setup, because if you go through the redevelopment plan, it mostly allows mixed use, it allows restaurants and commercial activities. So I believe that was the purpose, but at the same time, it was trying to tackle this issue as well.
Okay. I mean, I would just go back to what Ms. Salantis testified to about the master plan from 2016, and what you're trying to do is encourage development, encourage niche retail, encourage improvement of commercial properties, encourage rehabilitation and improvement, what we're talking about here, if you hold us to this FAR standards, are tearing apart buildings, shrinking them, and not having any of those things satisfied.
When we could, we definitely worked to reduce the building footprint. We removed the freezer at the back, the waiting room in the front, which was also an encroachment. We have eliminated that.
Okay, moving on to the D3 variances, and you correctly cited Coventry. The lot that the building is on, there's something roughly 7 or 8 areas or portions of the design standards that were not being satisfied. And in order for this board to reach a decision on whether you satisfied your burden of proof, I think you need to be able to explain why you believe that reference incorporating the design standards exists, what each one of those is seeking to address or prevent, and why each one of them, the failure to satisfy would still make the lot developable. You kind of address them in totality together. My instruction to the board is going to be that you got to look at each one, and take it one at a time. So I want to give you the opportunity to do that if you wish.
Sure. So with the driveway,
Actually, just before you start, my long-windedness has brought us to 10 o'clock, so.
Can I ask a procedural?
Yes.
Since members of the public, for 2 hours, I think, tonight, we listened to a regurgitation of what we heard last meeting, right? Can we allow the rest of the professionals to be relieved for the next meeting and only allow this professional to be here since everyone had an opportunity to question the rest of the professionals?
They didn't get the question of traffic.
Yes.
Person number broke them all
Traffic
together.
and planner have to come back, everyone else, they don't have to come back to cross-examine. But, I mean, it's up to the applicant, obviously, but for purposes of procedure, only the last.
Okay, I know, I forgot.
Yeah. Remember, we sort of waited.
Yeah.
So, Madam Chair, with it being 10 o'clock, we can carry this to the next meeting. Is that fit your schedule, council, or your team's schedule? And just,
We're going to have to make it work. Yeah, do you have the date, Mr. Commissioner?
We're getting it right now.
It's, April 13th. Is that correct?
Folks, there's a sign-up sheet for anybody who wants to be part of an email chain on this, so we can all, as a community, talk amongst ourselves. So if anyone hasn't signed up, who'd like to sign up, please see one of these gentlemen on the way out.
April 13 works for our team.
Just for the public, information, we really want your input. I know that you've been here a long time, and the testimony that you've heard, you didn't get a chance to ask questions on the last 2 people. So please come next month prepared with your questions, and then once that question's done, we'll go into the public portion where you'll all be able to give us your personal feelings and input on the application, which we also welcome, and hope that you'll come back. And I apologize that it's another long night.
Okay. Are we able to present any evidence?
First of all, I have to make an announcement under the law. The application for Seagrass LUB 2022-011 will be carried to the board's April 13th, 2023 meeting. There's a live meeting that begins at 7 o'clock here in the main meeting room at 22 Snug Harbor Avenue. There'll be no further notice to property owners, so if you had received a notice previously, you will not receive another one. I think I heard a question, just to answer everybody's question. When you have your opportunity to present your testimony, if you want to have exhibits or evidence, you're certainly welcome to do that. I know council, you may want to bring an expert planner, you are welcome to do that as well, as long as, as well as any other experts that you wish.
I spoke to Mr. Stratton, and he said he's already committed to another year.
We have a timeline that we have to make it.
You're going to have to get another planner then.
And, we'll post on Facebook, for those of you who are on the Highlands Facebook page, we'll post a reminder about next month's meeting, so that, you'll accept that reminder, but then you won't get another mailing on this. So we can put on your calendars, April 13th at 7 p.m.
I don't care about it.
Where are you? And we've had another few things that we have, so if you want to continue your conversation, you can just step outside. We really appreciate it. Thank
Do we need to make a motion to carry?
So we're going to do the minutes, Nancy?
Do we need to make a motion to carry?
Can I get a motion?
Oh, no, you don't need to vote.
You know? Okay.
Can you get a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion.
All in favor?
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So, LaRussa and Kutash second, all in favor. Meeting adjourned at 10:05. Thank you, everyone.
May I ask you a question?